Hello, dear friends.
Good day.
Hello, Igor Mikhailovich.
Greetings.
I'm very happy to see you today. I would like to talk to you on the following subject. As of today, everywhere around the world in various religious denominations, there is a large number of people who really strive for God, and this impulse of theirs is very pure, sincere, and open. At one time in their lives, these people really felt a contact with God, and this unforgettable feeling of inner grace.
It would be amusing if people who belong to religion did not experience this feeling, right?
But probably the ways...
It's only fitting that they feel it. Although, if we talk about this honestly, then still, unfortunately, not everyone comes to serve in religion, let's say by the call of their soul. Many people come just as if to get employed. Well, everyone in different ways, everyone has their own path. But indeed, as of today, thank God, there are still those who really strive for God by the call of their heart, as it is said. They come precisely to serve God. It's true, thank God, such people still exist.
This feeling is very familiar to me since childhood, as well as this inner search for God, an aspiration to restore this dialogue, which unfortunately was lost. Yet this feeling sort of accompanied me throughout life, and it appeared somehow independently of me. That is, I didn't know when it would appear, but I definitely knew at those moments that...
You were hoping that this would happen.
I was hoping that this would be permanent, and there was always this aspiration to restore this dialogue.
Indeed, it's enough to feel a contact with something warm, sincere and real once, and you always want to repeat this experience.
Yes, and there is also such a point that there was no knowledge of how to stay in this dialogue. Let's say,
Always.
always, yes.
But actually, this is not a dialogue. And here, let's say, a little nuance arises. In religions, it is said that a human must always be in a dialogue with God. This is important and necessary. A prayer, an appeal to God. All this goes through the inner. But here, there are a lot of such changes that have unfortunately occurred over centuries. And the tools have been lost. All this is shifting to kind of not a dialogue, but rather a monologue. And a person is constantly trying to converse with God, addresses Him. But when he receives a response, which always happens upon such manifestation, well, it's difficult to describe it in words, but those who had this experience do know that those are feelings that are incomparable to anything. Even when the experience is short-lived, these people certainly embark on the path of faith and adhere to it as a rule. Why? Because nothing earthly may compare to that bliss which a person gains while in contact with the Spirit. This is precisely like a kind of God's blessing when, as they say, the Holy Spirit descends and a person comes into contact with it. This is when everything sings in one's soul. Of course, this is true.
It is just that when you learn the way of how easy it is actually to come in contact with the spiritual world, you feel a need to share this, to share the knowledge of this easy way with people. Because there is a feeling that there are a lot of people with an open heart who crave and sincerely aspire, who simply became confused and go around, I don't know how to put this.
Well, they don't go around in circles. As a matter of fact, they aspire and force their way through. But in their way, there is the one who is called the devil in religion, meaning our consciousness. Well, consciousness, as we already know and discussed many times, is nothing but a part of the whole system. The system is exactly that devil. And even in ancient times, saints always said that the devil leads astray, demons whisper, don't listen to them, and so on. If we analyze what they spoke about our consciousness. Here, it's important to understand that there is such an Oriental wisdom. And Prophet Muhammad talked about this as well, that Allah, meaning God, is much closer than the carotid artery, but few people know that the devil is also as close as the carotid artery, and perhaps even closer. We have two arteries, and we are dual-natured. In reality, it turns out that God is close and the devil is close. This is what confuses people, because consciousness always twists everything and always takes everything, let's say, to something directly opposite to spiritual longings and aspirations. This is the path to which it always leads people, the path of struggle, the path of sorrow and grief. And here, if we note, as you've just said, people who had experienced this feeling, I mean the true feeling of God's love, they subsequently fell into despondency. They're always in anguish, in suffering, in search. Well, this very despondency and this very suffering is a bad helper, so to say.
It estranges one from God.
Of course. I also like how some people say you mustn't be sad. You must love God. Even if you don't have a reason to rejoice, you have a blessing, so rejoice. This says nothing. It's the same as the command, drop down and give me 20. There is a command, so you do push-ups as long as you have strength. The same here, you must rejoice. Well, how can you rejoice when you are under system's power while it has everything the other way around? Although again, demons are tricky, they also throw in joy and all sorts of things, and they create illusions. This is actually quite a broad topic, quite a serious one, that which you have touched upon now.
There is also an interesting point that when there is no knowledge and there is an aspiration to restore this connection with God.
Again, what does it mean there is no knowledge? There is tremendous experience. The experience of that path which many saints followed. Isn't that so?
And you know, I could feel this moment very well because anyway, I was searching. I was searching first of all for those people who also felt the same thing I did.
How can it be otherwise?
And I did find such people, but of course I mostly found just some texts and theory, yet there were also people who really shared their practical experience, and I always felt that there was something dear and there was...
That a person is not a liar.
Not a liar and tells the truth.
And tells the truth. And just note, oftentimes, there are many, well, people may confirm my words, many of those who are in the service of God in various religions, in all religions, let's say. There are such people, they say the right things. In the past, they were called scribes. They know every comma, where it is placed, but they are empty. Simply as if an empty bucket is sitting and mumbling something, or standing and mumbling, but there is no what is inner. He seems to be saying the right things and giving the right guidance, but he is without God. And so everything is empty. Meanwhile, there are people who are far from knowing everything. Also in religions, those very priests, but with their single speech, they achieve great results and people get inflamed with this love. There were many people like that as well, who had one parable for every occasion, but it worked. Why? Because they conveyed it with an inner impulse. They themselves lived by this love, while words are merely words. Words, what are words? Yes, we communicate, we understand thanks to our ability to talk. We understand each other. But in reality, we understand each other much better when we feel, when we listen internally. Even a person who doesn't know how to do this and what it is, still feels within himself what is happening. And he can observe both the activity of his consciousness and those deepest feelings towards another person. And please note, I would like to emphasize this too, the activeness of consciousness is always manifested in opposition to everything holy. This is really so. Suffice it to recall the experience of Christ. After all, he was thrown stones at and crucified by religious people. Isn't that so? But how could they not feel Christ? This is nonsense. However, this indicates that people were religious. Those were actually priests who demanded his execution, but they were empty inside.
Where is love?
Where is love? Where is God in them? This is also regrettable. And there are a lot of such guides, unfortunately. Well, religion differs precisely by the fact that it has rules written down. It has certain canons of when and what should be said, to whom and under what circumstances. This is also good. It's better than nothing, so to say.
Yes, it's just that it didn't work. And it turns out that those answers to questions didn't grant this inner contact. They didn't let people feel the reality of God. No matter how hard a person tried to follow all of these sets of rules, it is just...
But many encounter this. While a simple command, drop down and give me 20, it doesn't work in this case. You may repeat a prayer thousands of times. You may avoid using foul language and all that, but you cannot get away from your own consciousness. And the devil will use the same tools against you if you don't know how to resist him. They say don't think about anything bad. You won't think about anything bad. You will eliminate curse words from your consciousness as well as rude words. But you won't get away from either judging someone or thoughts about how weak you yourself are, that you won't get anywhere and that you are fighting in vain because you don't deserve that. Isn't this what consciousness says? It is.
But inside, something different is felt because when...
Well, I'm not saying anything. I'm talking overall, in general. That is why people are in search, and that's why they go around in circles. What is the very cause? Consciousness. The fact that, actually, they are controlled by the devil, while the devil always says one thing, show me. But even when they show him, he says, I don't believe. Let's recall the story of the Prophet Muhammad when he came and started talking to his relatives. What did his brother say?
That even if you show me a miracle, I won't believe you.
Any miracle, I won't believe you. Well, isn't that so? Let's recall Jesus Christ and his stay here. Miracles took place, so to say, because of his presence. But did people believe him? Some will say they believed. If they had believed, they wouldn't have betrayed him and wouldn't have rejected him, right? Even his most faithful disciples. Didn't that happen? It did. If people had believed, they wouldn't have blasphemed him and wouldn't have thrown stones at him. Isn't this true? It is. And why is it so? Because they're empty inside. Consciousness controls people, and when consciousness controls a person, he is empty inside. So exactly those who experienced contact with God and became filled at least a little bit with this, well, the greatest gift that a person can experience, then it is natural that he is in search. He is certainly attentive, but at this very point, the devil intervenes as an intermediary between a person and God. This is really so. I mean human consciousness. There is no worse enemy on the way to God. But what are people guided by? By consciousness, by experience. It's impossible to live in three-dimensionality without it. This is also right. We wouldn't see each other and wouldn't perceive anything. Everything would disappear without consciousness. However, you will never come to God with its help, because for consciousness, the spiritual world is ruinous. Therefore, it will do anything so as not to let a person in there. After all, it's not with the mind that a person realizes that there is God. He perceives this spiritually, internally, at the level of the soul, as they say. Well, not the soul, of course, but at the level of personality.
You have just said that consciousness is an intermediary between a person and God, so to speak.
Between personality and God, to be correct.
Between personality and God. It turns out that a person doesn't even know who the devil inside him is.
Of course he doesn't know.
And how he acts.
If we ask, who knows who the devil is? What kind of picture does consciousness draw?
Yes, I myself have encountered this.
Some sort of an ape-like creature with a tail and horns, which is running around and doing something. Well, you can look at the devil. Anyone can look at him. In a mirror. It is matter. It is material. It's our thoughts. All this is exactly what belongs to the devil. But is it possible to see a human in a mirror? No, it's impossible. A human, as personality, is a spiritual component. It is not matter. Not at all. And it's not matter that lives for the kingdom of God, as they say, but precisely the spirit. That which gains immortality while preserving individuality.
Also, at the moments of actual contact and being in these states of bliss and love, people who felt these states understand perfectly well that it goes far beyond the limits of their bodies, that it even goes beyond the boundaries of three-dimensionality.
Of course. Anyway, this is much higher than three-dimensionality. This is...
Exactly. And it turns out there is such a situation, but still, because of substitutions from consciousness, people try, as it is said, to cram the body and consciousness into...
What we have, what we see, what we understand is what we control, right? In other words, we are guided by what we have. And due to a lack of knowledge, people try to comprehend God, or let's say something mystic and holy, exactly through consciousness. And they try to evaluate this. That's why in religions, many of such explanations were introduced, which are literally on the borderline with children's fairy tales. Like a person will resurrect in the body and will be immortal, but matter, any matter is finite. That's impossible, because the entire universe is finite. Yet people want it to be this way because our consciousness doesn't understand it otherwise. But again, if we take the past, how could this be explained to a person? It was quite difficult. Now we operate with the concepts of energy structures, information structures and the like. People can somehow understand at least something. At least there is something to compare it to. But how was it in the past? Spirit? Well, it was talked about. But a person didn't understand how he would rise in spirit. He wanted to revive in the body because he was attached to the body through consciousness. That's why there were such explanations, and they still remain. So when a person believes that for his good deeds, he will be in heaven, in the body with his consciousness, with his emotions, then what kind of heaven are we talking about?
You have just mentioned transmission of experience through feelings. When people conveyed and shared the knowledge, they first of all shared feelings, what they felt. Actually, first and foremost, they conveyed...
Of course, those people who attained, they felt one thing. But how can you explain to another person, let's say a common layman who doesn't know how to feel it? Well, by means of some associations, some examples. After all, a person perceives himself as a body, mind, consciousness, and nothing more. And maybe somewhere there is a soul. Isn't that so?
In other words, it is so necessary for those people who provide believers with answers to their questions
to possess their own experience. But this is difficult. In the past, yes, it really was like that. When, let's say, people lived in a different way and cared about other things. Naturally, people were more spiritually free. At that time, it was precisely free people who came to service. I mean service to the spiritual world. Those were free people and they really shared experience, but they were understood more easily because it was a different world and a different life. That was quite recently, some 6, 7 or 8 millennia ago. Well, let's say closer to 7 or 8. 6 millennia ago, rather serious changes already began. The world was already changing 6,000 years ago.
So at this stage, the situation is such that a person who, one might say, should have shared this, so to say, experience, he himself is in search of this path. He himself
For sure.
falls and rises, we can say, just like his lay people. Those lay people, his congregation who...
Well, it's good if he is in search and he aspires. It's a great fortune and blessing for the lay people, because at least their pastor himself is going somewhere, right?
And he is not afraid to admit it.
And he is not afraid to admit it. He speaks frankly and they go together. He simply performs the role of the one going ahead. He takes on the responsibility for all mistakes and shares his experience. That's wonderful, of course, if this is so. But in actual fact, everything is different. When consciousness commands, here it is written, here it is said, and that's how we do it. While a person himself doesn't know what is said and how it is written. No, he knows what is written, but he doesn't know how to explain it to another person. And because of his despair, without knowledge of the tools and without experience, he preaches the best he can as he was taught, not more.
Well, perhaps every such pastor, every such imam or priest should be aware of the responsibility which he bears for.
Well, there are various cases. More often, pridefulness wins over responsibility. And in fact, pridefulness pushes people to take on leadership. After all, a clergyman is a leader before other people, and that's where consciousness helps to fight for, let's say, leading positions in their organization, unfortunately.
Thus, people got confused, and these personal ambitions...
Of course, but in reality, everyone who embarks on the path of service, let it be in religion, not to mention pure service to the spiritual world, even on the path of service in religion, he must understand and realize that he assumes responsibility not only for himself, but also for those people who come to him. And he assumes responsibility even for the people who are yet unborn. Why? Because he shares his experience, he gives guidance to those people who will have children afterwards, when he will be already gone. Isn't this true? And all this will have an impact, and the person will certainly be responsible too.
Here, let's say, what do clergymen lack?
They have everything. Don't they have it? Tell me, which religion doesn't have grains of truth?
Every religion has these grains.
Certainly.
And the most important thing is that people in all religions equally feel God.
Everything depends on a person. Definitely. God is one.
Of course, and that feeling which people experience, which I even experienced myself as I recall, I actually didn't know that it was called by some word, that it was called God. Namely, this was a feeling of bliss, such a...
Well, we are the ones who designate names and titles. Again, we designate those through consciousness for convenience of communication, in order to at least somehow explain something to each other, right? That's why we say it this way. But again, for instance, some community was formed, or something else. They split off from religion. Yet again, the values are still the same. Yes, they have introduced something of their own. That's how they prefer to call it. But this is exactly what is sacred, that very truth they are guided by. It is still God, it is still the Holy Spirit, it is still Allatra, call it whatever you want, but anyway, it is sacred, that which emanates from God, it is sacred. It is sacred in all religions. Why? Because precisely owing to this, a person attains life, let's say, true life. Isn't that right?
That's right. How important it is, actually, to know and understand this path. How really easily, absolutely easily one can feel this.
Well, I wouldn't say that it is easy either. Even if a person possesses perfect tools, he will still have to work after all. The spiritual path is primarily a fight. It is first and foremost a refusal to serve Satan. This must also be understood, but it's not easy. He is cunning, he is smart. A human is food for him. Therefore, he will not relinquish anyone.
But the mode of following this path is already different. I mean, one feels and understands.
It is conscious, and there is an understanding,
yes,
right?
It is conscious, and a person himself is responsible
What
for...
makes true knowledge so valuable, for example? That knowledge which was brought by the prophets, and which Jesus Christ talked about, and let's say it had been repeatedly spoken of before him too, it is valuable in terms of its simplicity and feasibility of its application.
And the fact that, owing to sort of simple tools, one can feel the reality of God.
And make a choice.
Really feel
A person will never be able to make a choice whether to serve God or Satan without knowing what it is. While in order to gain at least some initial experience to come into contact with the spiritual world, one definitely needs tools, which help, which tell, which... Let's put it this way, at least an elementary understanding of the fact that your consciousness is not yours, that it is precisely that tool by means of which the devil holds you here and enslaves you in a literal sense of the word. But this already arms people, and very effectively. Yet another thing is that consciousness doesn't agree with that. It always starts reasoning in its own way, operating again with the concept of love or something else, only already leading astray and twisting this word.
It just becomes sort of more active when a person approaches this moment when the knowledge comes into his life, Probably because consciousness also understands that as soon as a person comes into contact with the true knowledge, as soon as this very first moment of contact through feelings occurs, as soon as he gets to know this feeling which...
Then he starts resisting the devil, and he always strives for God afterwards.
Yes, that is why I remember from my own experience that exactly at this moment, at the moment of coming into contact with the knowledge,
Of initial
of this
experience,
initial experience and gaining perception through feelings, there was such a depth and great joy, and there were seemingly no questions at the moment of contact. Finally, I became simply inflamed inside, and I was delighted by how much that was it, how long I had been searching for it. And there was such a tremendous aspiration to live in feelings, to develop this, that sort of... And I cannot say that this path is complicated because that which
it is absolutely easy.
is burning inside when
But
you
again,
feel...
it becomes easy when a person starts living and being guided by it. Yet, let's step aside a little bit and look at how people live. There are lots of worries, problems, and all the rest. Consciousness makes a mountain out of a molehill. While a person is at work, he's at home, there are daily chores, trivial health issues, and whatever else. Consciousness turns this into a whole stumbling block, which is difficult to walk around and impossible to jump over, isn't it so? On the path. It's another thing when a person knows that all this is an illusion, and the only thing that is true and eternal is God's love. It is that which one should gain and accumulate. But this is when he knows and has this experience, yet he still has to come to that. And to come through what? Through consciousness. A human cannot get around the devil on the way to God, because the devil stands in front of him, in front of a human. And here one has to work.
You know, as of today, this very need arises thanks to the fact that, let's say, an experience of feeling the spiritual world has occurred. An experience of being in the grace of the Holy Spirit. I understand how many people there are who lived and strove just like me.
They still live
They
and
live,
strive.
search, and ask so many questions. Above all, actually, as you've said,
Yet the personality of any person strives for God. Even in the most ardent atheist, personality strives for God. This is true, this is normal. Personality wants to live, and it knows the truth.
this is embedded in us initially,
Of course.
by our human nature and essence. This very aspiration and this movement towards fusion with the spiritual world, and indeed, as it was once said, this path of fusion with the spiritual world is much simpler than living with consciousness, so to say. Hence,
These are incomparable things. In any case, this path is more enjoyable.
much more enjoyable, and I will just tell you right now how it used to be. I used to have so many questions which I want to discuss both with lay people and the same believers as myself. And first of all, I addressed the words of those people who are supposed to know how to come to God. In my opinion, those who are clergymen, imams, and certainly especially if I felt a person in whom this feeling of love was once burning, it can be felt very vividly, then at some point I was hoping that the person would show me the way. And what happened was that answers were given to some key questions. But since the main thing was missing, this very
Tool.
tool,
A
yes,
simple, understandable, and accurate
yes,
tool.
that is,
As they say, a map and a compass. What does a person lack? A map and a compass, right?
you know, at some point I simply understood that these are indeed people who follow the path just
Same
like
as you.
me, who are
The
mistaken
most ordinary
themselves.
and common people. Just people. No more, no less. The only difference is that they serve in their organization, but they strive and take care of other people. This is wonderful. And the fact that they strive to understand is wonderful. As for the point that they don't have a tool, it's not their fault. It has simply been lost over years. Whatever we take, people alter everything. Why? Because consciousness stands in the way. And consciousness always seeks to be at the top of the hierarchy, since it is the one fighting for positions and everything else, right? I mean, let's take any religion. It is first and foremost an organization, and it is extremely difficult for a spiritual person to reach some high position there. Why? Because, like in any organization, people stop at nothing. Well, that's true. Many people will agree with this. It's extremely difficult because there they do not select a person according to spirituality, but choose once again according to his mind and his usefulness to the organization. How loyal and devoted he is to the organization itself. That's the way people grow. And they grow to the point that they already have an opportunity to change placement of commas in texts. And by changing commas, they change the meaning. Well, that's how it used to be. Unfortunately, as of today, indeed, those simple tools by which elders lived in ancient times are lost. Simple and easy tools. That's okay after all, the grains still remain and the truth remains. People actually comprehend, and thanks to that they come into contact. Another thing is that little changes occur, so to say, and people rely more on what is customary in their organization. Someone relies on communion, he is guided by this. As something holy, when a person faces challenges and consciousness wins, he feels that he loses the last flame. He performs a communion and gains some inspiration, while someone else shows himself in some virtue. Everyone saves themselves in different ways, but again, this is because they don't have a simple tool and there is no understanding and knowledge of who Satan is in actual fact. Let's put it this way, he's clever, cunning, and he has left a memory of himself because it's impossible to get rid of him. He has just hidden himself well.
Igor Mikhailovich, we have just spoken about tools, thanks to which, let's say, this very dialogue with God is being restored.
Well, of course. Tools are very important. Let me give you a simple example. Let's take a bricklayer. A bricklayer works with a trowel. He has a mortar, he has bricks, and he has a trowel. How many bricks can a good bricklayer lay in one day when building a house? Well, it's different for everyone, but quite a lot, right? And now let's imagine that we tie a 32-kilo kettlebell to this trowel. How many bricks will that bricklayer lay? While this is just one comma in a text, yet it's already a kettlebell.
It is really truly important to understand to what extent.
The tool is still there, but it is heavy. It's impossible to lift, and hardly all people will be able to work with it. We can experiment on you. How many bricks would you lay with such a trowel with a 32-kilogram kettlebell tied to it? And how well would you lay them? A simple question, right?
A great parallel precisely with tools, now at this particular time.
But these are precisely tools. Well, in our society, holiness is exalted without knowing and understanding what it is. Prayer, meditation, and other spiritual practices, these are just tools. Let's simply try to understand. What does a prayer give?
Well, that depends on what kind of prayer.
Any prayer, the true prayer. I'm not talking about those prayers when people come to church and say, Lord, I need to increase my housing space, or the rubber on my car tires is bad already, help me to earn money, or better yet, make it so that the new protectors would grow on my wheels, right?
Let's say a tool thanks to which it is possible to tune in to this frequency of love.
Thanks to which people actually gain an experience of contact, yet there are very few of such tools. One of the most effective ones, if we take Christianity, is the Jesus prayer. Isn't that true?
Incessant uttering of this prayer, this is also...
Certainly. And what does it give? Let's just examine what is the purpose of this prayer.
Constant attention and addressing the spiritual world.
Some people call it a dialogue with God. Dialogue implies a conversation. We are now having a dialogue. But if I keep silent, you will conduct a monologue. Meanwhile, this prayer is precisely a tool of monologue, but thanks to which a person proceeds to a different level, to perception through feelings, not by means of consciousness, his ears and his tongue. After all, he doesn't say it out loud on every corner, although there were those who walked around, repeated this prayer out loud, and expected the same response. There were those who did receive an answer loud in their head, but those were the devil's tools used against them. While here we are talking about those who performed this prayer properly, who constantly repeated it inside themselves, regardless of whether a person was talking to someone or doing something else. This became sort of his natural need, and the person directed all his attention to the utmost, precisely to performing the Jesus prayer, to love for Jesus. Isn't that so? Inside himself, towards his soul. And people attained such a state that they began to feel. Thus, they received this answer, and the dialogue began. But when did it begin? One has to get through such difficulties, get through everything, so that, both in sleep and in wakefulness, this prayer would constantly go on. Yet, this is merely a set of words. Really, this is a trite set of words. If we speak the same language while another person doesn't know this language, he won't understand what we say. But when a person is filled with the Holy Spirit, or, as we say, with Allatra, when he is full of this power, of God's love, then, regardless of whether a person knows your language or not, he feels this. This is visible, this is felt. It is only not felt by the one who is controlled by the devil. This should be thought about too. I exactly gave the example of Jesus Christ, that stones were thrown at him and he was crucified by those people who called themselves and considered themselves believers. If people do not feel what is holy, if their consciousness is indignant at that holy, while it has to revolt, this is the defense of consciousness itself. This is, let's say, a self-preservation instinct in that very consciousness. Then, a person knowing this and understanding that consciousness is outraged, listens to it and goes away, or takes a stone and throws it. That means he's a slave of the system. Whereas if he listens and rejoices at meeting something holy, for his consciousness is outraged, his demons are mad, that means he has encountered something holy, he has come into contact with the truth. Then the person rejoices at that. It means he's already very close to it. And isn't this what the holy elders spoke about? The ones who used the Jesus prayer as a tool.
You know, you've just said such a key point, that the inner prayer is a dialogue with God. It turns out that God always converses with a human.
He converses with a human, but he doesn't converse with Satan. This has to be known, and the difference is huge here, guys. When you voice your desires from consciousness with complaints towards God, you are not heard. When you are in sadness, in grief, about the loss or something else, you are not heard, because all those are Satan's tricks. God is joy, God is love. There can be no sadness in the spiritual world. It just doesn't exist. This is true. There is always joy inside, no matter where a person is and what happens to him. So, again, I'll go back to the elders. What did they speak about when they came to know the truth?
About Allatra.
About Allatra. They spoke about joy, about filling up, about that happiness which overfilled them, even when they were on deathbed, didn't they? When they suffered from bodily illnesses, they spoke about joy. They spoke about God, and they rejoiced at the fact that their body was pushing them out.
This is a wonderful experience, and you know, now we already understand that this prayerful state, this, one might say, inner prayer that elders performed and, let's say, hesychastic practices, this is what is conceivable and achievable.
It's a tool.
For every person.
Of course.
That it is not a lot of some chosen people, that holiness is...
I'll put it simply. In this world, all people are chosen. People don't come to this world by their choice. But this is a gift. This is a great gift for everyone. That they are here, for they have an opportunity to gain life eternal. And to waste this gift is foolish. It's the same as... Well, I'll give you a simple example. You are walking across a desert. It is boundless, it is hot, you have no water, you are taking your last conscious steps. And at this moment, somebody comes and gives you water, but you refuse to take it. Isn't that so?
Foolishness.
It is simply foolishness. You cannot say otherwise. And why do you refuse? The jug is not of the right kind. Its shape or color is wrong. Well, isn't that so? And what do we see happening? That's exactly what is happening. The tool is wrong, so they don't use it. Drop down and give me 20. This is blessed, while anything else is unacceptable. As for the fact that you are dying of thirst and you are being handed a jug with pure water, but the shape is wrong.
But I can say that those people who feel the world of God,
Those who feel, those are
who
united.
hear these very tools, then nothing will perturb them.
Nothing.
Not the form in which this knowledge is conveyed, because they grasp this very essence,
The essence.
that most important point which...
Those people who feel God know that God is one, and they know that nothing divides us. Isn't this what Jesus was talking about? Isn't this what Muhammad was talking about? Precisely about this. All people are united. Isn't this true? It is. It is people who divide.
You know, thanks to the tools, to that pure knowledge which has come, let's say, into my life, everything has changed. Understanding of my religion has changed in general, what various rituals mean, in particular what the liturgy is. That it is indeed giving thanks, expression of gratitude towards God by this one heart, by one united church.
Jointly.
Jointly, yes.
That's right.
That it is not some place, so to say, that it is that unity of people at the level of feelings and which way to express it.
It should be.
Yes, and what this thanksgiving to God is.
I will add, it should be this way. Right?
It is really desirable.
That's the meaning of that very liturgy. Exactly through feelings, it is exactly sincere, it is exactly true. And it is in joy and in love, but not in sorrow and not in moaning. Isn't this true? While at times, people come like a poor relative to a rich one, act sad and complain about their life, appeal to conscience, don't they? They do the same in front of God. People come and complain to Him. To whom? And they hope that He hears them, but they all sincerely believe. Consciousness convinces them that God hears, He knows everything, He knows every word. He does know everything. Of course He knows. Main things, and what He needs to know. But they say God sees every person. He doesn't see. This is true. As long as a person is under the devil's power, he belongs to the devil. This is his domain. Whereas when a person becomes alive, when he gains life, he belongs to the spiritual world, and the devil is powerless. There is either black or white. There is no gray.
Igor Mikhailovich, in which cases does God hear a human prayer?
God does not hear a human prayer. God hears a human when the human reaches the spiritual world inside himself through his soul. Isn't that so? Only this way, when a human has personality, precisely at the level of feelings, he aspires, invests his entire attention not in the whisper of demons in his head, but in love inside himself. And at one fine moment, all people who really sincerely generate even a simple inner message. We remove the words, but leave the essence of this prayer. Precisely sincere love directed towards one's soul, into oneself, towards God. After all, there is no God outside. God is only inside a human, and everyone follows their own path. Why? Because every personality has a soul, as a part of the spiritual world. Are they connected with each other? They are connected by that which is called the silver thread, and this has always been told about. It is that very intimate connection. If there were no this connection, personality wouldn't exist. Right? Right. And those powers, the spiritual powers, which are transmitted from the soul to personality, should be returned again to the same place, to that very soul, to the spiritual world. And if a person does this correctly, honestly and sincerely, if he feels that it is needed and he is guided by this very feeling, I'm saying once again, and not by the whisper of demons in his head, then he starts feeling a response. While the response consists in intensification of this love, in understanding of simple things, and complex things become simpler. That's how the dialogue begins. And at this point, God already begins to hear the person, only when he deserves that. Well, excuse me, when a person is controlled and managed by Satan and comes to God with indignation, demands, and whole lists regarding health, pridefulness, money, what else? Well, regarding anything possible that is material, except God's love. Well, at the end there is a note, save my soul too. It is written in a small script at the bottom of a long list. Who will actually hear him except Satan? And Satan is not interested either, because he's exactly the one who dictates all this to the person. This is also true. As a matter of fact, people don't even think about how their consciousness works, how thoughts emerge and why a person hears. Yes, we understand at the level of neurophysiology how we hear, don't we? Molecular vibrations go through the eardrum, then through the malleus and the anvil. They are converted into an electric impulse that comes to certain neurons of the brain, and then what? At this point, science stops, doesn't it? But if there is a disruption in this sequence, we don't hear. That's right, because what can we hear with? There is coarse matter, subtle matter, up to the level of information. After all, our thoughts and our consciousness is an informational structure, not more. It's impossible to detect a human thought. It is possible to detect its manifestation when it is unfolded at the level of the brain, meaning there is excitation of one or another group of neurons. It is possible to achieve and to see pictures that are manifested and unfolded because our brain is like, well, like a monitor, let's put it this way. A monitor is again where information comes and certain pixels merely get activated. But we observe a picture. In the same way, our brain only generates pictures, nothing more. But personality perceives those pictures. Yet who creates and imposes these pictures? Consciousness. Right? But from where do they come into consciousness?
Attention originates from personality.
Here neurophysiology ends. Psychology begins a little bit, yes, our habits, our images, and so on. Naturally, the more we develop our secondary consciousness in particular, the more intellectual people are, and their knowledge of this world expands. This is natural, this is normal, that's experience, and everything else. Yet why does primary consciousness reach a level up to the primary surge, as we say, up to 5 or 6 years old, and that's all? It doesn't evolve any further. No matter how hard you try, it still remains a child. Basically, this is no secret for either psychiatrists or psychologists. For anyone, everyone knows that a child lives even in an old man. So a human is sort of a strangely designed being. On the one hand, he is clever. On the other hand, he's a child. Whereas if we put together this child and this clever one and move them aside, then it turns out he's also a little bit spiritual. And precisely the spiritual part should prevail over both the child and the academician, so to say, in a person's head. Isn't this true? Though not in the head. In the head there is only a screen. The head is merely a screen, it's a monitor. Everything else is at a different level.
It is so important to choose that life which is burning inside, instead of those dry programs of the system by which...
Well, important. This is wonderful. People are here exactly for this reason. Say, many people wonder, what am I here for? Here's the answer. Who are you? Consciousness says, well, since you are here, this means you are the cleverest. You should reap everything in life. Generally speaking, this is the secret of alcohol and drug addiction. Why do people become alcoholics and why do they become drug addicts? Because in this very altered state of consciousness as a result of intoxication, a person starts feeling himself as the one who he is not in reality. Well, it is easier for consciousness to control him this way. So it begins to show him that he's a superhero. Then he is cleverer than the cleverest and the like. Thus pridefulness is satisfied. Yet after sobering up, he understands his own worthlessness and reaches for the glass again. That's the entire chemistry.
Igor Mikhailovich, I would like to go back to how a person can feel life within himself, because undoubtedly we have just spoken about those things which are hellish conditions here on earth. This is when the system leads a person astray into some altered states of consciousness just in order to relieve this very loss, let's say, of the dialogue with God, of expression of one's love for God, because indeed God always communicates with a human and His love is boundless, and that joy, that love which He grants.
Let's put it simply, the doors to the spiritual world are always open. This is true. People close these doors in front of themselves by their choice of whom to serve.
That is, simply by trusting consciousness, they sort of stand...
People are mistaken. This is precisely the paradox.
They stand in front of some illusory door.
Of course. When a person relies on his consciousness in spiritual matters, he seeks material things, meaning he seeks what is inevitably dead. Whereas, pardon me, the spiritual world cannot be dead. By definition, it's eternal.
I'm very touched by what has just been voiced, that a person sees exactly the inner component, exactly this sincere appeal to God with entire openness, with entire purity, with entire devotion.
But not through consciousness.
But not through consciousness.
This is precisely the paradox. And for many people, a question immediately arises, if not through consciousness, then how?
Exactly.
And here it begins. Through consciousness, I understand. I come to a temple. Well, as a Christian, I come to a church, light a candle, and stand in front of an icon. What is next? I'm saying a prayer. I don't argue with anyone. What is next? Am I already a saint or not yet?
You don't humble yourself enough. You repent too little.
Why? I repent, I humble myself. I don't do anything superfluous. What is next?
Nothing. A dead end.
But why?
A dead end because all these actions are external.
Absolutely right.
In other words, there is a certain code of some moral and ethical norms which should exist in society.
It is surely needed, and here we should give credit to the churches and to all religions that they provide, even for consciousness, these restrictive limits, and people remain human at least a little bit.
There is this unbelievable grief because what you do, sort of this, you fulfill this code of rules, so to say.
Grief.
You expect a descent of grace.
Grief originates from consciousness.
Yes, I mean a person...
Well, that's the first obstacle. Many people also teach that you should cry for God. You should show how you repent, how you pray for forgiveness of sins and suffering. Well, pardon me, in suffering, I'll put it simply, would you be interested in keeping a crybaby beside you?
I want to run away.
At least for a year.
I want to run away, of course.
At least for a day. To sit with a crying baby for 10 minutes. Is it pleasant? Here's the answer for you. So, if you don't want to sit next to a crybaby here, just imagine how it is there. If only whiners get together. It's sad.
So, first of all, it would be great if...
First of all, one should learn to love. Love is the only way. There are lots of paths to God, but the road is one. Only through love. There is nothing else. But the trouble is that people don't know what love is. This is indeed the trouble. Everything they call love, it is all distorted, it is all three-dimensional, it is all material, and everything comes to a wrong end.
There is another key substitution, expectation of a descent of this very grace.
A freebie.
Yes, instead of
God is merciful, so He will forgive me. I'm saying once again, you as a person who, well, let's say, were born in churches, right? I mean, as a liberated, spiritual person. I perform everything that I'm being told. I go to church. Everything is as it should be. What is next?
You know, according to feelings, as I recall, this edge is so great. At some moments, it seems to me that one becomes estranged from God, meaning when one gives oneself up to these external rituals without an inner understanding of what is embedded there, then moving away from this internal, the distance.
And here you've noted correctly, an inner understanding of what the liturgy is, why it is held and so on. But then again, a clergyman says that it is joy, that the liturgy is service, the liturgy is this or that. But what if a person doesn't know how to love? He doesn't know this grace in actual fact. What will he do? He will sit and wait, an awaiter. Isn't that so? He will be a spiritual awaiter. He will just sit or stand, do everything that he is told to do, and wait until it is handed to him on a silver platter. Isn't that so?
Or he stays near those who feel a state of grace but doesn't produce.
Because it is pleasant. Well, indeed, it is pleasant. For people, if they can calm down and pacify their consciousness, because, as a rule, consciousness doesn't react very nicely. Not in everyone, of course, but let's say in absolute slaves. Those ones meet with hostility. As for people who are more or less calm, so to say, for them it is certainly blissful. To be near a person who is filled with the Holy Spirit, well, this is...
The most important thing takes place.
It's like being near a warm stove in the cold of winter, right?
Yes, and the most important thing takes place at this moment. This very feeling flares up in you as well.
Definitely, but not for long.
The same feeling awakens in you.
It awakens.
You start having faith that you do know what the spiritual world is.
A feeling emerges. There emerges a feeling of understanding, of something greater, but suffice it for you to move away. And you immediately lose all this. And the most interesting thing is that a person doesn't understand how he loses it. Isn't that true? Until he drives himself into grief again, recalls how warm and joyful it was near that person, and he rushes to him again.
So now there comes an understanding of how important it is exactly not to just abide in this state, not to just preserve this state, but how important it is, let's say, to multiply this love for God.
It should be endlessly multiplied while a person is here. And how can it be otherwise? Life is exactly love. If a person doesn't generate love, he will not receive it. Isn't that right?
One shouldn't stop expressing one's gratitude and love for God.
Love and gratitude is everything that a human can give to God. This is everything he can offer, and it is the only thing that he can actually not ask for, let's put it so, but rather what he can give to the spiritual world and receive. And what can be greater? What is more important than life?
Everything is perishable.
Everything's perishable.
Indeed, it is somehow foolish when...
There is such an ancient expression, all-conquering love. It refers precisely to the true love, precisely to that love which overcomes everything. Yet what has consciousness done? It has converted all this. And love of a woman for a man and of a man for a woman began. Subsequently, consciousness has turned all this around, and love of a man for a man has begun. You see how we are going down the steps. Isn't that so? I mean, it's a natural process, a devolution.
Still, let's say, a question arises. How? How to express this love when you feel, when inside you, not even in the body, but inside, there ignites this very life.
As a matter of fact, it's not in the body. Yet what is the first mistake people make?
A search for bodily sensations.
They expect to have effects. That's right, a search for bodily sensations. They expect effects that would happen to their bodies, inside the bodies. If love is supposed to ignite, heat should flare up inside, then what do they wait for? Physical manifestations. From whom do they expect this? From the mind. Who suggests that to them? A demon. Isn't this true? And in such a way they can only do harm to themselves. Because by focusing on any part of the body, while as a rule people focus on the solar plexus area, or on the heart as it was said in the past, although heart is a metaphor, all this actually went deeper into the soul area. People subconsciously know and feel where it is, well, let's say in the abdomen area. Although a little bit to the right, but what's the difference?
You know, we've been talking about this now, and I recalled such a point that it is precisely that inner feeling, that inner state which has to be developed. There is a substitution in religions that precisely this spiritual feeling...
It's not a substitution. No, I disagree with you that it's a substitution. These are merely associations, some attempts to explain what it is, which were recorded in ancient times and not understood by people. Is it really a substitution? It's just a lack of understanding.
People just don't have keys.
Quite right.
They lack understanding of what is embedded in their consciousness.
As a matter of fact, in any religion, there are a lot of coffers with priceless knowledge, locked with a key. It's not a secret knowledge. It is simple and true, and there is a lot of it. Here is an elementary example if we take a look through the prism of the Bugalatra at any religion. How much is revealed?
You know, it's an amazing feeling when you understand other religions, when you not just...
When you understand all religions.
All religions.
And when they become revealed.
And when everything is one whole in them. When you understand that every person in a different religion...
You understand that it is merely the same dish which is shared among the entire family. That's wonderful, of course. When you understand, but it would be even more wonderful if everyone would understand this.
There is a need to share it, because it is very much felt when others join in.
But why does such a need arise?
I can say that it is very much felt when every soul, let's say every personality expressing its love, joins the spiritual world. And I can say that the feeling I experience at those moments incredibly intensifies. It suddenly multiplies because it is felt that it's not one person joining, but it is, I don't know, sort of rejoicing and thrill of the spiritual world. Just a kind of celebration and triumph in love sets in, and there is such a joyful response.
A good similar description was given a long time ago by one Zoroastrian man. When he was asked a similar question, he said, just imagine that all of us abide in love and joy, and someone else who abides in love enters. Do we feel better? We do. And when another one enters, do we feel better? Of course we do, because love is multiplied. There are more and more of us, brothers and sisters. The family is growing. It gets more and more joyful. So that's what it's like in the spiritual world as well.
It's a great joy when a person really comes into contact.
It is really so.
And it is always a great happiness exactly to feel how strongly...
Because there is no difference. Because when you feel another person, you understand that all this is one.
That perception through feelings...
That all of us are relatives regardless of who a person is, right? And where he lives. And it is interesting that this is felt no matter where people are. It is just felt because it exists. And since it arises, hence it emerges. Even when it emerges, it is felt. But it is sad when it is lost. After all, there are many cases like this too. When a person gets inflamed, but consciousness wins, he gets distracted. Of course this is sad.
It is just so wonderful when there are many people who have joined this God's love, and how much of this love is manifested in this world. Because we can say the conductors of this love into this world are exactly people themselves.
Only this way.
Who by their choice.
How can it be otherwise? This is precisely the world which is given to people. And people are creating it. This is really true. Isn't that what is written in the Bible?
That is a big, like...
This entire world is given to people. And people are here by their choice. I emphasize once again, they create this world precisely by their choice. A world of love or a world of suffering. That's exactly what takes place in total. And what we see is all a result of human efforts, a result of human choice.
It's an important insight that God's love is manifested in this world owing to a person's choice in every moment here and now to manifest.
I wish it were in every moment. While in reality, what is happening? If we face the truth, thank God and thanks to religions, such people appear and used to appear. In the past, there were more of them. Nowadays, there are less, and we observe the process.
It's just that, there is also such a feeling of deep gratitude inside because some time ago, I myself was also searching and I felt the presence of God in my life, but I didn't know...
You understood that He is there.
Yes, but I didn't know that it was actually a merit of particular personalities, a merit of those who had once chosen for themselves this very path to conduct love in this world. And there is simply such a great gratitude that owing to this choice, I can say at my moments also, at some key points of my life journey, God's grace was manifested and intensified, and it was easy to take the right step. It was easy to take a step to God, a step towards God.
Well, easy or not, but the very fact that there was such a possibility to take this step, it's already good.
So there is simply this understanding inside that when there are more of all of us together, of those who really love God and conduct, let's say, multiply God's love, when there are more of us in this world, what a great help there will be for those who really strive for God, who really feel this need to return to Him. Because indeed, let's put it straight, the system is strong in the modern world.
As never before. Now it's a culmination.
You mean the system has never been as strong as nowadays?
It was, once.
It ended with...
Well, it ended, let's say, with a spiritual reign for 1,000 years. It was the time when Satan, like a homeless dog fed at the dump on human dregs, there were still those who tried to serve him. That's how the world is arranged. But for the most part, everything was different, and afterwards he went hungry for millennia. Whereas nowadays he's feasting, now he needs nothing.
Well, I would say the information that you have just voiced is more inspiring, because we would very much like that at this, so to say, peak of Satan's feast that he is having so far, that very event would actually happen.
To spoil his dinner, right?
Right.
What a human meanness.
Well, let's say we greatly rejoice at the examples.
But it is he who taught this.
We are very happy that there are examples in history when people, even, let's say, at such moments, the peak moments of the system's concentration, the system's activation, by choosing for themselves a path of service.
The thing is that life has existed since long ago. And it used to exist. Let's say our universe emerged 14 billion plus a few years ago. Accordingly, the system itself is also around the same age, whereas life appeared later. But it has also existed for many more than 1 billion years. I mean life in this universe. However, it's not the first and not the last universe. And it is not alone within the boundless space, so the experience is tremendous. Yet, the choice is always up to those who are not just spiritualized, but who are soul-filled. The one who is soul-filled has an opportunity to live forever. Those who are spiritualized simply live, while a human being, unlike all other living creatures, is soul-filled, and since he is soul-filled, it means he has what? The right of choice. Just look at how fair everything is. If you want to, you can serve Satan, And as a personality, you will cease to exist. Well, you'll be in slavery, if you're lucky, for a couple of centuries, if you're not lucky, for a couple of millennia. After all, hell isn't eternal either. It is temporary.
You know, this is wonderful news that there is precisely a point of a person's responsibility.
Of course.
You see, the hardest part is to assign responsibility to someone else, to some imams or some clergymen.
They are merely people.
But when you take your spiritual matters in your own hands...
Yet how can you assign responsibility to someone else in spiritual matters? You can study, but shifting responsibility for yourself and your spiritual development onto someone else is unrealistic. It will not work out. The spiritual path is a path that a person surmounts on his own. And only when he reaches this God's light, he merges with others, then he feels. This is what you talked about, that yes, it is joyful when there are many and so on. But one should actually attain this. One should come to it. While between this moment and now, there stands no one else but Satan. No matter what we call him, it's a stumbling block, it's a serious obstacle. Our consciousness, merely that. And in fighting it, almost all heroes lose. Do you know why they lose?
Why?
Because it's impossible to win. It's unrealistic to defeat consciousness, it's unrealistic to defeat Satan. One can simply move away. As for moving away,
you know, to what extent...
How come not to win? Because it is precisely he who controls a person, while you only need to...
But nowadays, it's just a unique and blissful time when there are tools on how to do this, how and where to move.
Well, nowadays, these tools existed 1,000 years ago and earlier.
It's just that it's the time when they are brought in their purity. This very first step probably begins with the point when a person really, in all honesty...
Do you know what the first step begins with? The first step begins when a person inside himself, to his own consciousness, when it suggests picking up a stone and throwing it, the person says no. That's where it begins. With unclenching one's fist, when the stone falls under one's feet, that's what the first step actually begins with. The stone, in this case, I would understand this as, I don't care. Cessation of hatred and cessation of indifference. After all, sometimes indifference is even worse than hatred. Hatred is the reverse side. But in this case, it is easy for a person to feel what is behind it too. Behind this fear, behind this hatred. Hatred is in fact a derivative of fear, which lives in a person. But when there is indifference and a person doesn't care, he is so self-centered that it seems to him that he is the only one who exists while the world doesn't exist. There's a more severe form. In this case, it is more difficult for such people to escape when religion or something else, they don't care. When a person is even a devotee of some religion, and he fanatically believes in his religion only, or he fanatically hates all religions, it's easier for such people, because here Satan increased pressure. He increased pressure because their personality is more free and it has a much bigger chance to break free from his shackles. That's why he applies such a force to hold a person chained. You know, like a horse that is violently striving to the loose while they try to hold it back. A lot of strength is needed. Whereas when a person is indifferent, this is much worse. This indicates personality's weakness in the spiritual aspect. This indicates that the child, as personality, didn't develop since birth. There were few spiritual examples. He degraded, he is indifferent. There's already a more serious trouble than hatred or fear.
This is such a situation where these people, let's say, in whom consciousness predominates now, and in whom the system's positions are strong. I mean, the one who now denies the truth all the time actually has a great potential.
A potential of cognition.
And a capability of cognizing this truth.
Of course.
One should simply accept this truth first of all and feel it.
Accept. The first thing a person should accept is the fact that he is a human. He should become aware of his spiritual and material natures. Understand that he has two arteries. Both God and the devil are much closer than those arteries for him. When a person understands this, it's already easier. Then it's enough to understand that a person doesn't control his consciousness, but consciousness controls a person. This already unties one's hands and gives one an opportunity to study how the system works, because without studying it, it's impossible to win. When, out of the blue, you want to yell, rant, or quarrel with a near and dear person, well, who doesn't experience that if we just take an ordinary family? Why are there quarrels and brawls? Because of pridefulness and confrontation. When a person understands and realizes that any matter strives to dominate another matter, always, in any form, hidden, subtle, rude, but always, that's how matter is arranged. That's why, in the family, everyone always fights for leadership. But understanding this, you already take a giant step, because you can make a choice and unclench your fist, dropping a stone at the right moment. This is a step already, isn't it?
This is great that at such moments of confrontation, it is very easy for a personality to understand that at this time the system is acting. But there are other moments as well. There are other examples of a family where people who have felt the spiritual world are in a state of caring so that in the other person also, so that the other person would be in this state.
Well, again, how can he be in this state?
Let's just say not to strengthen the system's positions.
Simply put, you're right. But what is done for that in the first place? This doesn't really mean that if you came to some religion, gained knowledge and it was revealed to you, so you come home and begin to terrorize, to arrange sort of, let's say, various domestic religious manipulations. This would also be an attempt to dominate, right? But what's the point? Why do spiritually free people have families that are freer and calmer? Because there is an understanding, right? That in another person, a person doesn't want to develop spiritually. This is his right, it's his choice. After all, in fact, no one has the right to force anyone. This is true. If you enjoy serving Satan, so serve him. But on the other hand, when in another person in your family, hatred flares up, you understand that this is not the person, but it's exactly the work of consciousness. It is actually some program that has entered, the person has accepted it, he'll get over it and calm down. He himself is good. Isn't that so?
On the one hand, there is this good intention to help, but how can one person help another?
By not interfering with his choice. This is sacred.
By abiding in love.
By being the one who loves.
Because at times, really, no words, one might say,
no words will replace sincere love.
I also wanted to share my story, so to say. I'm from a Christian family myself, but there are both Catholics and Orthodox Christians in our family. Yet I was baptized in Orthodoxy. Basically, in our family, there were never any questions or divisions as to who's in which denomination. But of course, when there was my first search for God, when in my childhood I attended different churches and in the same way entered both the Catholic cathedral and the Orthodox church, from the adult's perspective, it felt a little bit like I was doing something wrong. Meaning, they somehow looked at me askew, knowing that I'm Orthodox. Then why was the child running both here and there? However, inside there was this very sincere inner impulse to figure out what I actually felt, how to find and return to that state of bliss which I felt before. This feeling was always in the forefront, and this issue of returning into the state of feelings engendered this searching, to search everywhere, in various sources, in holy scriptures, and to search exactly for those who really felt the same thing I felt. It is so interesting that on this path I came across people who talked about what they felt, about joy, about love, but there was no...
Yet everyone talks.
But the key point was that I didn't always feel love in them. I mean, there was a sort of discrepancy.
Here, let me interrupt you a little bit. I was always surprised at how people can be in churches and at the same time treat it as a job. Well, this is really, if a person comes to service in religion, I understand that many people come as if to work. We already talked about it. That's already just a way of survival. Or more often, of course, pridefulness pushes people to bless someone, to have someone listen to him or something else. They sort of come for an illusion of power. I mean precisely those who simply go there as if to work. But in fact, the majority go by faith. They are prompted into it by an inner call. Yet I'm surprised at why people, while being in a church, do not absorb the atmosphere and do not develop spiritually themselves. This is a paradox. I would compare this to a situation when a person is dying of starvation, walking around gardens full of various fruits, but he's lazy. He's too lazy to stoop down to pick up the fruits or to stretch out his hand to pick them. At the same time, he's dying of starvation. After all, they have plenty of examples before their eyes of both other clergymen and those very parishioners, because far everyone comes empty. Many people feel. And how is it possible not to feel a person who is filled with the Holy Spirit? Well, how? It's the same as with a hungry man. His sense of smell gets more intensive, right? He smells food like a wild animal a mile away. Well, in this case, it turns out that people are so closed off by their consciousness from faith that they become, I cannot even find such a word, how stupid they are. This is what amazes me. Unfortunately, this does exist.
You know, I wanted to acquaint you with a person who... I'm from Belarus myself. In Belarus, there is Saint Elizabeth's convent, and there is a person who has basically played a very significant role in this Christian life of mine because...
Archpriest Andrei.
Yes, Archpriest Andrei Lemeshanag.
Well, he's an interesting person and...
I can say that...
He's been knocking for a long time. But I have a different question. Why doesn't he enter?
Maybe due to a lack of knowledge of how to make this step through the open door.
Fear. Fear to part with his consciousness. Fear which, well, consciousness gets in the way. I cannot put it otherwise. After all, he feels. He is not empty. He had an experience. He lit up with this light. He strives for this light. And he wants this. But at the same time, I wouldn't say he actually has such pridefulness, no. There's just fear, Well, many people unfortunately experience this when they stand at the threshold and knock while the door is open. They just lack a step. They simply lack one step. Although as a person he is unique, no wonder he has inspired you. So to say, he's felt and he...
Indeed, it's like...
He often brings joy.
Yes.
Yet he gets sad sometimes. This is true.
But it is joyful that there is this honesty and openness, not only maybe with himself, but also with all believers. I mean, the person, we discussed it, we raised this subject once in the video, consciousness and personality.
He's not always sincere. There is play.
This is also felt a great deal when the person is indeed honest with himself and when he...
Well, there was a friend of mine. There still is, thank God, but he's not here anymore. Anthony. I met him, and so Andrei actually resembles Anthony to me. That one also abode in such a spirit. He had an experience. At that, he had an experience in his young years, and throughout his life he was in search of that experience. It's interesting that when I met him, he was of rather old age. already quite grown up, let's say. But in his soul, he always remained young. He acquired that experience in his young years, and he lived by those very moments all the time. He aspired. I asked him a simple question. Why don't you take a step? A simple question. Literally 3 or 4 days passed, no, exactly 3 days passed after I had asked him this question. Then he came. On that day, he didn't answer me at all. There was such a feeling as if he was cut off. He withdrew into himself to such an extent and started pondering. Then he came and said, "You know, you're right." I said, "About what?" "Well, I had work, a lot of people, and other things on my mind. I had just asked. After all, it's his problem. He's the one to bear it." He said, "You're right." I asked him, "About what?" "Really," he said, "I cannot take a step." I said, "Why? It's so simple." He said, "It is simple. When you know in which direction you should step." Here it's exactly a tried lack of knowledge. Why? Because relying on the canons and everything else, people have no map, and the compass is broken. There is always a problem with the last step. Consciousness is a mediator, that's the trouble. It's impossible to perceive through it, while consciousness always puts its 2 cents in.
How many such people are there who knock on the door that doesn't exist?
There are many, very many. I'll put it this way, there are many such people among believers of all religions, and there are many such people among clergymen. But on the other hand, this is joyful because they feel and they knock. Yes, they lack knowledge on how to take this step. Yes, consciousness interferes, but still they aspire, and this already gladdens. Not every time do they yield to temptations of consciousness. In many cases, they overcome it. Well, after all, they are humans. Well, a human has the right to stumble. The main thing for them is to make it in time. That's what is important. Otherwise, it's a pity. When it's the same as when you long to see a relative whom you haven't seen for a long time. You make plans. You arrive, but he has left. That's a pity.
It is so important for this meeting to take place.
In time.
In time.
Absolutely right.
What a great help to many people when you are able to give them a hint how they can meet too.
For that, one should take this step. Oneself.
You know, in this man, there is really a sincere aspiration to help people in some way. He talks to people, to his flock, as an equal. He's not afraid to admit that he also falls and makes mistakes, that he also follows the spiritual path.
He's rather famous, I should say. Many people listen to him, and he inspires many. That's already good. Even if he only inspires them to search. If he just keeps them from foolishness, that's already wonderful. But I certainly would like him to take this step too. He'll be able to help many people then. Very many. Well, that's his choice.
It turns out that there is such a situation that the person who sincerely aspires to help other people needs this help himself. Because, let's say, who can help him to take this very step so that he and people who follow him, really those thousands of people, would get closer to God?
Well, nobody except himself. Everybody surmounts the spiritual path themselves. How otherwise? After all, no one will walk this path instead of him.
At this point, how important it is to trust exactly in feelings and not in logic, not in consciousness, which is basically...
That's the trouble of many people. I'll give you a simple example. As of today, there are indeed a great many people among clergymen who study their religions in order to just take a step by means of alatra. Well, you know this, of course. For many, it's no longer a secret, either because this is spoken about openly, but only a few speak openly. Why? Because if something isn't blessed, it is sort of not allowed. to take food from someone else's table when a person is hungry himself.
While the greatest blessing is this very pure,
Yet I have another question. Is God's table really someone else's? If a person is hungry, is it really a sin? Let's say, for a dying child to take bread from the father's table, especially when he's not against it. Well, somehow, it's not quite clear why people act this way. It seems to me that if a person is really looking for the path, if a person really strives for home, for God, then there is nothing forbidden of what leads him to God. Isn't this true? And how can it be otherwise? Consciousness of some people resists, but this is normal. Consciousness is supposed to resist. How would it perceive what prevents that very Satan from controlling people, so to say?
all the more what we're talking about, this knowledge, really helps one to become this very love. It helps to...
Well, let's say Alatra precisely cuts kettlebells of people's trowels.
It simplifies everything a lot. It simplifies people's understanding and...
It is simply knowledge.
How easy and simple it is for those clergymen who have accepted Alatra, who have feelings themselves, and already are in contact with God's world to convey the truth to their parishioners as well.
The paradox, you
To
see,
those who address them.
the paradox is that in their organization, they have to keep it a secret. Although as of today, a lot of them, I often talk to clergymen about this. Some of them even, when they need to ask questions, they come to me secretly from others. The funniest thing is that others come from the same people and also secretly from those ones. I even asked some of them, why do you hide from each other this way? I'm just interested. They say, well, you see, it's a rule. I say, who made this rule, people? Didn't you yourselves? That's a paradox. They complicate their own life. Humans, what can be said here?
Thus, there is some kind of, so to say, minuscule imposed fear and illusion from the system.
Consciousness.
From consciousness.
From consciousness.
Does it just block this sincere craving?
Well, again, let's say, the more independent a person is, the easier it is for him. But when he is dependent, well, there are certain rules, and they have to follow them. But all this is temporary, it will pass.
It doesn't save.
Well, God saves.
An understanding that God saves plays a great role too. What is the choice of a person himself? What is the role of a person
A
himself?
person's choice, I'll put it simply, if a person doesn't choose God, God will not save him.
And one can choose him only
It won't work otherwise.
through feelings.
Of course. Mind will not choose God for sure.
In the expression of this very love in every second, in every instant.
Life.
Life in God.
This is exactly what is called life.
Right. It's just that I've prepared a video and I would really like to show it.
A little surprise for us. Okay, let's watch it.
I just wanted to acquaint you because thanks to the fundamentals which were brought, let's say, also into religions, and thanks to understandings which were shared by Father Andrei as well, there are indeed understandings which helped me in my time. I can say it was sort of a springboard for me to move on. Certainly, real spiritual development started already when, thanks to Alatra as the knowledge of the truth, I came to understand these very keys, how to do this. I mean, everything went somehow easily and quickly. Well, I don't know. It's just that moment when, indeed, as you've said about the kettlebell, when Alatra as the knowledge cuts this very kettlebell, and not only from the trowel, but it cuts the kettlebell, so to say, of this consciousness, And you as personality are already in freedom.
Well, I'll put it as follows. Allatra doesn't cut the kettlebell of consciousness. This is a person's choice. Allatra is merely a tool. And whether to use it or not, that's already the choice of a person.
I can say, having accepted Allatra and feeling Allatra inside, it is, well, I can say from my own experience, it's a way to freedom.
It's a big difference. One may accept, but fail to feel. Yes, I accept, but what do I accept? Only a book or a conversation on TV? Well, we talked and communicated. But if a person doesn't really accept internally and doesn't stand on God's side, he will remain under Satan's power. You cannot get away from it. This is true. Okay, let's watch.
We come to church for trifles. Something started aching here, or somebody fell ill, or we want some changes, or we want some square meters of dwelling space. There is some quarrel. We come for trifles. And here we understand that we should ask for something different. We should ask for salvation of our immortal soul, because everything that is temporary, all sorts of dwelling spaces, money, all that is rubbish. In eternity, it won't have any value. Where will you take $1 million or $1 billion with you? What do you need them for in heaven? You don't need them. What will you take there? Your own self? Some kind of abilities of yours? Some kind of your... You see, there is love there. And where there is love, there are totally different things. The last ones become the first.
Well, he's funny in three-dimensionality. What I would like to say regarding this case, he does speak correctly. The person had contact and he understands the essence of things. But at the same time, after all, even words that we say carry certain, let's say, understandings. And these understandings continue to prevail in a distorted version. Why in a distorted version? For instance, salvation of one's soul. We say this too. These are generally accepted terms. But the soul is immortal. It belongs to the other world. Meanwhile, in our society, salvation of the soul is talked about everywhere, not salvation of oneself. Thanks to the soul, right? The soul is, again, that very tool thanks to which we can save ourselves. But this mindset makes you perceive the truth differently. Thus, a person cannot feel this. It turns out that we invest the power of our attention, these very spiritual powers, in salvation of what is immortal. You know, what would I compare this to? I have the following association. A person falls overboard, the sea or the ocean is raging, he's running out of strength. Friends notice him and throw him a life ring. And the person thinks, oh, it's a life ring, I should save it. And with his last strength, he is drowning himself while starting to throw this ring back on board. Well, this is really so.
Just a simple lack of understanding of what the soul is, what personality is, the very process of salvation.
The process of salvation, what personality is, of course. This is serious in actual fact. Lack of understanding of what consciousness is, whom it belongs to, what personality is, how it originates, how this process takes place, and what the process of salvation is. Salvation is when personality is getting closer to the soul. A fusion occurs, and an angel is born. It cannot be otherwise. But again, for many people this will be incomprehensible in consciousness. How is that? It's clear there is a soul, but what do you have to do with the soul if it is something sort of a third? That's also, we are saving the soul. It is the same as there are some people, once we already discussed this in one of the videos. Well, I meet people come, I hear a lot about where life has been sending them, and it gets interesting. It turns out that there are some religious organizations or sects where they engage in saving God. God is in such a miserable, diseased and pitiful state that he needs to be saved. So I ask a question, how do you save him? A person says, we send our love, we cry, we suffer. How can you help God in crying and suffering? God is the spiritual world, it is boundlessness, it is eternity. Well, who is a human, even a group of humans, who haven't even had contact with these, let's say, who haven't had contact even with this light coming from the spiritual world. They just act from pridefulness under the control of consciousness. I just look at such things and cannot but marvel at how powerful the devil really is and what humor he has, amusing himself with people this way in their process of salvation. After all, what attracts them, first and foremost, is the aspiration of personality for salvation. It actually feels that this does exist, that there is immortality, there is God, the personality of every human feels it all. Consciousness doesn't perceive that. It stands in personality's way to God, keeps it away from there, and does everything it can so as not to let this process take place. We already said more than once how beneficial for consciousness is the state of subpersonality, or speaking the language of religion. A person's stay in hell, for consciousness, is a prolongation of its existence for many centuries to come. But what about the person? After all, it is suffering. After death, a person clearly understands what kind of mistake he has made. I mean, after the death of the body, when that which we rely on here, in this three-dimensionality, and what we operate with vanishes. Our eyes, hearing, hands, and everything else.
This is also great to have an understanding of why the devil needs this. It's his food.
The devil merely wants to eat. All this is banal and simple. A human being is food. Since a human being is soul-filled and not just spiritualized, there is a source of those divine powers in him. No matter how you slice it, everything happened according to God's will, and he breathed life into everything. Well, it's natural that this reflection, a parody of the world, I mean the devil with his illusions, it feeds on those powers, while a human is the source. And the more the devil distracts this attention, which should have been directed to salvation, to reuniting, the more sated he gets, let's put it this way. Well, he's a beast that experiences constant and eternal hunger. Try to hold your consciousness, and you will know how hungry it is. Really, any person can try, without a thought, without a picture, and not to be asleep. That's it. This is precisely the sense of hunger. Do we actually order those thoughts which come? Do we really want those pictures? No. Consciousness tells us that we want this and need this. That's how it ruins people's lives and diverts them from God. And these kinds of substitutions come from consciousness. Just a little change. Save not yourself, but your soul. Merely that. And regarding love, after all, there is love there. There is nothing else. And as he says, the one who was first becomes last, while the last becomes first. Well, God's love is the first and the only real thing, and it should always be the first for people. Whereas consciousness substitutes it all. Well, that's interesting. It's interesting that the person really tells the truth, that one shouldn't ask for anything, it's all trifles. How can you come to a church to God and ask him for health or square meters? Great words, let's just say, according to Alatra.
Right. It really coincides with what is told.
With the truth.
Yes, it coincides with the truth, but the keys are missing.
It coincides with the truth, coincides with Alatra.
You also said that let people just try to stop this flow of thoughts, and we understand that indeed it's impossible to stop the flow of thoughts. It's impossible.
It's not within human power.
Not within human power.
Even in deep meditative states, when they supposedly stop thoughts, no, they don't stop them. They invest the power of attention in a three-dimensional image or in a stretched-out thought. But they still feed the system. In other words, meditation is exactly a method of feeding. As a matter of fact, meditation is the work of consciousness with consciousness. You feed the system anyway, what's the difference? Isn't that so? It is. Does consciousness stop? No, consciousness just tells you, you have stopped me. You have indeed stopped me. You don't have a single thought.
So it turns out to be such an interesting point. What is sinfulness? They say that in order to overcome sin, one shouldn't think about anything bad.
Yet what is sin?
This is a vicious circle, yes.
Let's start with what is simple. What is sin?
It's a loss of contact.
Sin is exactly service to Satan. Can anyone forgive my sin? I'm just asking a simple question. Absolve me of my sins or forgive my sins. I mean, my connection and service to the devil, can anyone forgive it for me? A simple question.
By means of repentance.
By what repentance? They will assign me to read a prayer. I will kneel in the corner and read the prayer. Will I be forgiven? At the same time, I will listen to my consciousness. Regarding the one who put me in the corner and made me read this prayer.
What is sinfulness?
What is sinfulness and what is sin in general? It is exactly service to Satan and subordination to one's own consciousness. Subordination to Satan, this is exactly what sin is. And how can a person get rid of sin? A simple question.
Turn one's attention towards love.
Absolutely right. That's the only way. That's the path of gaining life. Being in sin and with sins, a person cannot enter God's world, while sin is exactly consciousness. It has been spoken about from time immemorial. I already mentioned Zoroastrianism today. They speak clearly about it there. Well, it's a pre-Christian religion. People did know about this. They had knowledge of it. Later on, it became a little bit distorted. Someone benefited from that because these are manipulative technologies that I forgive you on behalf of God. Human, how can you forgive anything to anyone on behalf of God? Become a part of Him, and you will understand that this must not be done.
Igor Mikhailovich, people also say that confession may be called a restoration of dialogue with God.
No.
But in fact, it is only the first stage of working on oneself.
Absolutely right.
To learn how the devil acts inside a person himself.
Once, a long time ago, well, we spoke about this more than once. There were cathars. They had catharsis, purification. It is actually not a confession that I am sinful and committed something. It was all turned upside down already afterwards. Like I gave in, the devil seduced me. Yet there was actually work, regular work, on studying how our consciousness functions. People studied its mindsets in a group. What consciousness tells me, what it tells you. And we see that one and the same command comes to us at the same time. When we observe this, we see it, and we understand this pattern, we understand the programs that you and I are like two computers. Excuse me, while the devil is like the internet that imposes the same programs on us. And that's all. And having understood these stereotypical patterns, we just tell the devil to get lost along with his programs. And he already starts performing that function which we need, right? For instance, we need to eat in the morning, go to work, do this and that, and that's it, and then don't disturb me. Thus, consciousness executes this program while we live. At this time, we abide in love while consciousness works. That's how it should be. This is precisely getting rid of sin. I mean, we should force the one who makes us sinful to work for us. This is right. That's the way it should be. How can it be otherwise?
So, in fact, this very process of catharsis, which Cathars also call this way, is the moment for a person to understand in what way.
It was the process of learning.
Also how it works inside a person.
Of course.
That it's not somewhere from outside, not general phrases.
How it works in you, how it works in others. These are not general phrases, it was a thorough study. People studied every thought that came. It was all different, it was a working process. Whereas afterwards, even among Cathars, it all began to change. They also started having some kind of ritualism in this process, and then it actually went all the way down to a ritual. So what will it end with? Pardon me, a mass of people come to confession, but the priest doesn't have time. That's understandable, he is one. While parishioners are many, so he covers one's head and says, did you sin? I sinned. Murders and all that. Did you sin? I did. But if I didn't kill anyone, why should I confess? I didn't steal, so what are you telling me? And they stand right there and give hints, say, I sinned, Father. Well, how? If I didn't do that, if I didn't even think of it, why should I repent undeservingly, right?
Abuse of authority, indulgence.
Absolutely right. Well, it's kind of funny, but on the other hand, we can understand the priest too. After all, people come, being controlled by consciousness, they want to talk. They don't really come for spiritual joy. They come to receive something. Like Andrei just said, they come to increase square meters for something else, for money.
Not in this sincere work on themselves,
Of course.
not in understanding of what this work on themselves can lead to, and
People don't even know what work on themselves is. It seems to them that performance, even those who try and follow the spiritual path, who even try to follow it, adhere to performing certain rituals in a given number and as it should be. Those very prayers, that very repentance, attendance of church in time, this is good, this is wonderful, this is really good. It is much better than nothing. However, without the inner feeling, it doesn't give anything. It is merely hope that if I act this way, then after my death, as it is written, at some point in time, after the great judgment, I will resurrect again, young and vivacious.
Life is cultivated here during this lifetime.
Certainly, true life cannot be in a body, it cannot be in matter, that's unrealistic. People knew this from time immemorial. Once again, it was spoken about. Saints spoke about it as well. Isn't it true? Why did they rejoice when their bodies were decrepit and dying? Well, they precisely ascended in spirit. They precisely said that one shouldn't be sad, this is just a body. Dust to dust, spirit to spirit. Isn't that so? Okay, let's watch more, it's interesting.
There are words by Silouan the Athonite that it's not important whether you are a worker or a king. We can say whether you are an archbishop or an ordinary church janitor. That doesn't matter, you see, but it's important what is inside of you. A person comes in touch with grace of the Holy Spirit, and suddenly life emerges in him. You see that in his eyes. His eyes become different.
This is valuable. He's telling the truth here.
God appears in his eyes. One should fight for joy. How? By not trusting sin. You may feel bad, depressed, maybe in a low mood. Everyone is happy, but you shouldn't trust yourself. The church blesses you to rejoice.
Let's stop it.
So rejoice.
That's a good point, isn't it? Here we can clearly see the absence of tools. The answer is simple and the argument is weighty. The church blesses you to rejoice, so rejoice. But a person has no understanding and no knowledge. What should he rejoice at? And who will rejoice in you? Will consciousness rejoice? Andrei knows, he feels. Or rather, he doesn't know, unfortunately. He feels how it should be. But he doesn't even know how to describe it.
This is great that...
This is the trouble of very many of such people who, as I say, are standing at the threshold, knocking, feeling, but they lack just a little bit.
They lack an understanding of the difference between joy that is from consciousness, joy as emotions,
And true joy, yes.
an artificial one, and true joy.
He knows what true joy is. That's why he's filled with this wisdom. He really says a lot according to Alatra, but he doesn't know it. There is a lack of tools to explain, but the excuse is simple. The church blesses you to rejoice, so rejoice. But consciousness will be against it. How come? He blessed me to rejoice, so I will rejoice. What will I rejoice at if there is sadness everywhere? A simple question, at what? If consciousness is against it.
So what is paramount? Actually, we can say that the trigger for the emergence of this joy is, first of all, love inside.
Love. Only love solely. True love. Personality is love for the spiritual world. When a person gives back this love and begins to receive even the first response from the spiritual world, that is happiness. Then it's already...
This very joy is meant.
Of course. It's already power that begins to enter you. It's already the power of God. And what is the power of God? It is exactly Alatra. But Alatra, excuse me, not in the sense of the Alatra book. It's just a book. Can it be holy?
Well, let's say, without feeling it, consciousness will distort any information, even the one which is set forth in the book Alatra, but it enables a person to...
And here you've given the answer, that which is set forth in it. However, not everyone will even be able to read it correctly and to gain that knowledge which is embedded in it. After all, if a person just goes through consciousness, that's impossible. Why do people read it 10 or 20 times and every time they find something new? To what extent a person is ready, that's the extent to which it is revealed to him. Well, in fact, it is ordinary paper, isn't it? With regular signs. If you don't know the words and don't know this language, you won't be able to read it. And it will be empty. Right?
But you can always feel those who have Alatra inside.
And this is really the truth. You can pass by any scripture but is impossible to pass by. A person who has a latra inside. In this case, either consciousness will get activated and look askance, or the soul will sink. Here already, again, you see, the soul will sink is an expression that is stereotypically used in our society. It's not the soul that actually rejoices, it is personality rejoicing.
It expresses an incessant song of love for God.
Of course. Okay, let's watch.
You should understand that sin lives in you, which now wants to spoil the feast for you and your close ones. Why should you trust sin?
Well, sin is precisely consciousness. He is saying correctly here, it lives in you, but where does it live?
Christ never called anyone to coos or revolts. He called people to love.
That's right. The only thing Jesus called people to was love. Also, if we take Muhammad, what did he call to? Love. And he said that the time had to come when there would be love all over the world, meaning Islam all over the world. But in the proper understanding, it is God's love that should be all over the world. Yet in our society, division immediately begins, so Islam means that they should dominate everywhere with their customs. Well, we speak about God, we speak about love, we speak about something greater than mercenary interests of a narrow circle of people. But so it is perceived. Yet who perceives it? Consciousness. Why? Because it has divided everything. Thus, it turns out that consciousness divides, while Allatra unites. Let's watch.
God's love is what we can build everything upon in general. Everything in this world. It is the foundation of everything, you see. When there is grace in you, you will forgive, you will reconcile, you'll be patient, you'll keep quiet, and you will bear another person's infirmities unconditionally, without any sort of human truths and judgments.
He's telling the truth.
Not to be insincere, not to lie to oneself, first and foremost, you see.
Not to be insincere and not to lie to oneself.
I would like people to cherish this love which the Lord gives them. They should cherish and value it. I would like peace to be with people. Then everything will become simple, and there will be enough angels. Joy is in that beauty, in that inner freedom, which emerges in a person. Perhaps it emerges for 1 minute, but it is already there. There is already a path. There is already some choice. And you already know that all this is not hopeless. When you are pressed down to the earth, when you really understand that sooner or later everything will end, and that's it, then suddenly you touch eternity. That's what joy is. You understand that now there is already a different dimension. Now there is no time and no space anymore. Now it's eternity.
What about liturgy?
Liturgy is surely paramount, but it is also a human being.
And here, it's also an interesting moment, isn't it? What about liturgy? Liturgy is surely paramount.
This very moment when a person really feels.
It is interesting that he has just been talking about the supreme, about the real. As for the woman in front of him, I don't know her. She's concerned about earthly things. She's concerned about rules. Well, Pharisees. Do you know who Pharisees are? They are those who perform everything as appropriate. They were not bad. They were merely Pharisees. They did everything as appropriate, but didn't go further. So now we have very vividly encountered a person who has partaken of life and is speaking not about flesh, but about life. And a person who lives by visible earthly values, rituals, and everything else. How striking the difference is, isn't it? That's why I love Andrei. He is alive. God grant he will take the step.
You can see God in that. It is also a word of compassion, which can really grant a person such joy, such fullness, because this word is from God. It is also some deed. When a person does it, regardless of his certain state or mood, it is necessary to do this for God. So a person actually goes.
There is an important point here. As a matter of fact, God needs nothing from you. You don't have to do anything for Him. But when a person feels that he can help in some way or something else, this is like service to God, right? In this very understanding, but here he says exactly that. Even when being despondent, a person still does it sincerely. He does it as if for God. So he goes and overcomes, yet here he is talking more about himself, about his own experience. That's really interesting. This is done precisely contrary to one's consciousness, regardless of those mindsets from consciousness. This is exactly the struggle. This is exactly one's personal Armageddon. And Andrei is a wonderful example, let's say, of a person who really aspires, who had this experience and strives not to go through it again, but to come and stay there. Well, consciousness hinders him a little bit, but this is good. If consciousness didn't hinder him, he wouldn't aspire and wouldn't struggle so much. He wouldn't overcome it and wouldn't spend energy, right?
On fighting oneself, then the Lord comforts. At a certain point, I can say that when I wasn't baptized yet, there were minutes of such joy, but it was probably in childhood. I recall I had such a question regarding death. It concerned me a lot. Later on, this somehow smoothed out, but it was very painful and acute. I didn't understand how it is if there is death and that's all. There is nothing.
You needed someone to explain why it happens so.
Somehow, this wasn't even discussed at our home. I was baptized in front of the icon of Our Lady of the Sign. It was on the 10th of December, 1978. But before that, I had already been searching for God actively for several years. It was possible to engage in anything, to be keen on all sorts of things, including Oriental, Chinese wisdoms, and various human teachings that were logical and understandable to the earthly mind. And suddenly, God's miracle occurred. It's as if you suddenly live through, you enter a different dimension. You live through some moment and instant of life where everything and everyone is in their places. In this world, you always feel that something is wrong, something is not as it should be. You try to find something, but cannot find that which you don't even know what you're searching for, because you feel bad inside. You don't have that fullness of life, which occurs when you are with God. So when it happens, when a person actually touches this love, then of course his entire life changes. After the christening, a miracle occurred, and I was born again. I experienced this physically. And for several months, I somehow couldn't come to my senses because of joy, because everything was in light. Light was on everything. Close people didn't understand what was happening to me. Has he gone crazy or what? Because my eyes sparkled. I looked at everything and realized that here is life. Church is not life, while that is real life. But I didn't know or understand anything yet. So I came to the church and waited for the Holy Spirit to descend on me. And He descended. There were a lot of tragic moments, I would even say, because after I had been baptized, I started living in some light, but I didn't understand this light. Where was it from? There was no humility in me, and eventually I started judging someone. I saw people doing wrong things, that they did something carelessly. There was some slyness, and I began to judge. While this judging resulted in the fact that I lost God's grace and suffered greatly.
Here we see his revelation. And this is true. It's not judging. Well, it's not a matter of judging, it's just the work of mind. As long as he was living, but then consciousness distracted him, and that's it. It enslaved him, but he feels and he's telling the truth. He knows and really has this experience. He's striving for it. Yet he simply needs
just to pay attention again.
lack of knowledge.
Lack of knowledge.
Lack of a tool and knowledge of the fact that
It's just that so many people all over the world, now really clergymen,
they are in the same situation.
they are in the same situation when they feel grace.
In all religions at that.
And it is very easy to return to this state, but they abide in.
There is one point here. When a person opens up for perceiving God's love, really opens up, light illuminates him. But this is actually a temporary phenomenon. It is that utmost help which may descend on a person for his diligence, for his faith and aspiration. But it cannot be everlasting. It is only an insight, an experience that he gains, and then everything is in his hands. Sometimes it is hard, protracted labor, but it depends on a person. Or it can actually be very easy. After all, there were many people, and I hope there will be, who have overcome all these very easily. They just stepped aside from this struggle and observed consciousness until it became hungry, and then they treated it as an animal. If you want to eat, do that. If you don't want to, just starve. And everything fell into its place. Any animal becomes tame if you find the right tool for it. Likewise, consciousness is easily trained.
How easy it is actually for people, let's say, who have felt such a degree of grace and descent of the Holy Spirit upon them and lost it, living in such hell, right?
Sure.
I mean, without this grace, how easily with such an aspiration, with such a thirst, so to say, they return home. So,
Well, how easily? They easily return when they not just reach the door, but also understand that it is open. That's when they cannot be persuaded anymore that there is no God or that the spiritual world doesn't exist. Here consciousness is powerless, but it possesses power on his way, leading him astray and driving him into mistakes, despondency, and anguish. Here Andrei says that the Church blesses you to rejoice, so rejoice. But he doesn't understand what joy consists in and what it means. Drop down and give me 20. That's the point.
such people themselves understand perfectly well that simple compliance with a set of certain norms of Christian spiritual life doesn't lead them to that feeling which they experience.
That's wonderful, yes. This is wonderful, but at the same time it disciplines, it's good. And it's not worth being despondent. But they don't say how to gain this everlasting joy.
They themselves don't know.
Yes, if he possessed these tools, he would have been one of the first ones to forget what sorrow is, because he knows the value of this descent of the Holy Spirit. He knows what the flame of Alatra inside is. Let's watch more.
I don't understand what happened. No way I could agree to become a priest. I realized that I was losing freedom. Meanwhile, I'm a freedom-loving person. I enjoyed traveling. Generally speaking, I saw a lot of things, everything that could be seen, including negative cases. how people lost God, how people ignited and died out. When they found out that my father worked at the higher party school, he taught and trained the party personnel, while his son worked at the cathedral. This was a tragedy for my father. It was such a big moment of ordeals, of course, for me and for my father, who later on became a truly faithful believer. I certainly had a goal. The goal was to help people, and it remains the main goal. There was a hospital. There was an opportunity to help those people, to go to them, you see, not just to change diapers, but a person was leaving this life without having an experience of contact with what is most important, with his Creator. This is hopeless, you see. He's in total despondency, in despair. This is terrible. It's the death of the soul. So, of course, I had a goal to help.
Again, what is the stumbling block? Not saving oneself as personality, but helping people.
Because one wishes it for oneself, for one's own self. It's just this moment.
It is also an attempt to please God. We do pious deeds, we talk about God, but this is great, that's how it should be. But again, it's an imitation of those who attained this very fusion, who gained life here. And again, even igniting like the archpriest Andrei, they get filled with this power, this fire, this warmth, and whether they want to or not, they will already share it. This is a need. If you don't have a need, this means you smolder, or there is silence in you at all, whereas when the fire of God's love is burning in a person, it's impossible to hold it in oneself. This is true. Here you no longer force yourself, it's an inner need. Consciousness may resist because it's lazy. But what can it do? It will go and take care of people. At the same time, Andrei is very close to the truth and says many right things, yet there are these moments of personal suffering, so to say, due to the lack of a tool, nothing more than that.
This is a common aspiration to help people. On the one hand, it is right, but there are no tools for how a person can help. He speaks of help in external matters, right?
In external matters, yes.
That which actually all people should do.
Of course it should be natural.
People's natural attitude to each other.
As for those who embark on the path of service to God, their task is precisely to help, not in the external world, not in the visible one, but where their help is really much more important and necessary. Well, let's just say, thank God at least there are such heroes as Andrei.
Yes, because certainly next to such people, a person at least doesn't lose faith in goodness.
That's already a good thing.
Right.
That's already a lot. Sometimes people will stop themselves from doing something bad or will recall the priest with a kind word. That's already good. Anyway, goodness already begins to prevail in such people. Well, this is already a step towards victory. Let's keep watching. It's nice to watch good things.
There will be many mistakes, but if you don't do anything, you see,
Here he is right too.
of the whole world, and think that this is spiritual, it seems to me it's a substitution for us, namely for us.
He understands correctly regarding substitutions as well.
I have to educate a lot of people, not just monks, but also in the town church. Now there are 200 people in the town church, and there is a female town church. There are homeless people whom nobody needs except God, you see. Meanwhile, Father Nikolai told us, you will be saved by the prayer of sick ones. It's impossible to live without God. It's just impossible. And this is not a theory. We do understand. The Lord says, without me, you can do nothing. Therefore, I advise you to receive communion as often as possible.
And here the priest switched on. If before it was a person who sincerely strove for God, here, in front of people, the servant of an organization immediately switched on. This is good, he sincerely aspires and all that, but Where is the essence?
He simply lacks tools and understanding. He lacks a true understanding of what communion is.
Of course. And he says, receive communion as often as possible. This is wonderful for those for whom communion is a certain means, so to say, a tool for returning to perception through feelings. While for the majority of people it is sort of an ordinary three-dimensional action which takes place. So what?
Formality.
So what? Has a person really changed? Has he felt anything? No. Has he started working on himself better? No. Has he really partaken of Jesus' flesh and blood? Surely not. All of us are clever people. It's the 21st century. Well, there is wine and bread. This embodies. But if it embodies, then it sort of helps as well, right? Well, I'm not saying it's bad. It's good for those who know and perceive this ritual action the way it should be, who understand that it's not flesh that should be eaten and not blood that should be drunk.
It is union with God.
Of course, that is sort of cannibalism. But those people understand how deep it is in its essence, that it is unity, it is merging with the spiritual world, it is spiritual convergence with Jesus Christ, meaning, well, it carries something greater in itself. Whereas here, even a simple explanation is such that one should receive communion as often as possible.
This merging occurs thanks to a person's choice right in the moment, here and now.
Of course.
One has to love and to express this love.
Well, consciousness perceives directly and substitutes just like that without explanations. Thus everything gets distorted, and we begin to save our soul and help people believing that this is pleasing to God, while at the same time we don't want to do that, forcing ourselves. Although this should be a natural need, we don't create conditions for this to become a natural need for every person. Isn't that so?
In society, there should simply be...
Certainly, many serious issues are touched upon. But now, the more you show to me, the more I become convinced of how powerful Satan really is, when he simply deprives even strong people of tools and introduces little changes in placement of commas. How tragic this may be.
Because behind the words, there are no feelings.
Of course.
There is no practice of exactly this feeling. I mean, it is not supported with a practical experience through feelings.
There is aspiration, there is experience, but where is work?
Based on my experience, I can say I was at a dead end at a certain point for many years. The very fact that I was ordained as a deacon, I started receiving communion, and it saved me. Confession is a conversation with God. Speak in your words, in your own words. Don't make anything up. A priest is just a witness for you. He's supposed to help you, you see? Or at least not to hinder.
This is correct.
It is very important to be in incessant prayer. It's a constant connection of the soul with God. The moment this connection is lost and a person already does something wrong, here we already...
The soul cannot lose connection with God because it's a part of the spiritual world. It is us as personalities who can lose connection with the soul. And many people, especially those who start performing spiritual practices or such as the archpriest, who lives by this feeling, at the moment when consciousness wins, the first thing that they feel is pressure right here. The silver thread as if gets blocked and personality's connection with the soul is lost, and that's it. Attacks from consciousness begin, the world becomes gray, and daily life turns into hell until, well, as he says, he got out of it. He started taking communion and got out of these states. For him this is sort of significant, but maybe it's because he understands correctly what communion is. Well, for others, it might not work, but if they knew the essence and had experience, this would certainly work wonderfully.
So, in his case, there was a sincere appeal
Of course.
to God at that moment.
That's the only way. with perception through feelings, right? Let's continue.
One needs to run to the emergency room for resuscitation. Resuscitation is repentance, confession, meaning it is healing. I come to the hospital, let me not leave unhealed. And once we are resuscitated and cleansed, we can fortify ourselves. So the Lord says, "Here's my flesh." He prepares a meal for us. You should perceive it this way, you see? Maybe it's not quite theological, but it's about the real.
He says it, you see?
No, I'm hungry. Sin has worn me down. I am in torment and suffering. What for? Lord, help me. So we taste Christ's flesh and blood and restore our connection with God. And we again...
Well, at least he explains it this way. It's already good. Well, it is close, let's say, for people's understanding. It is the right example.
To partake of Christ, in other words.
Well, it is meant spiritually here.
Thus we again receive communion for living as a spirit in eternity, for spiritual life. Everything that is outside Christianity, outside orthodoxy, is built on pridefulness. All this knowledge, you see...
And just look at how different he is now.
Different.
Simply different. Now he's an empty bucket. Everything that is outside Christianity is built on pridefulness. Now a prideful man is sitting and broadcasting that. Right?
Isn't it actually a self-exaltation when representatives of one religion talk about exclusiveness?
Of course. It's the same as... Once I gave an example regarding religions. What they are about the father and his children is the same as one child would say that he's a true child of his father, while his brother or sister are not the children of his father. How can this be?
How subtle this substitution is, and how clever the system or the devil is that, even on this ground...
The trouble here is also that, first and foremost, any organization, especially a religious one, whether it wants to or not, will say that it is closer to God. And so everyone must repeat this and insist that they are unique before God. Well, it's the same as I said. If one of the children would say that he belongs to his father's family while the other child appeared accidentally,
instead of just loving the father.
Instead of just loving, right. But this is immediately seen, and it is so strikingly different. After all, he conveys this to people. He tries to keep them within Christianity. Maybe he does it all with good intentions. But it's not true. It's not him who is speaking now. And now he's empty.
They can surprise. Surely, they can sometimes inspire a person for a certain period of time this way. You see, it used to be very trendy in the past, although now there are also Krishna worshippers and various other trends. Here, you see, a person wants to get into heaven with his own effort. So he's climbing, sort of the Tower of Babel, only in such a Hindu style, in an Oriental style. All this leads in the wrong direction, while in Orthodoxy, the path is completely different. It is through penance, through humility, through realization that I myself cannot do anything without God. An Orthodox Christian cannot say, "Look, I become better and better. I pray, I have more and more grace. God is totally in me. I'm just burning." People would say, "He's crazy, right?" And they will definitely call a doctor. Something is wrong. His eyes are sparkling and all that. Yet, this is exactly what it's like for people in the East. There, you see, that's it. There's already nirvana. A person is already in the astral plane. This life is no longer interesting to him.
Let's stop at this. Let's better have a good impression. After all, we understand perfectly well that this very sight is exactly a stumbling block in front of the open door. It's understandable why he's doing his best and what he wants, how much he wants to show, what is good to express it. However, what is it? It is judging. is an exclusivity of one child over another. This is sad, of course, but it happens quite often.
It's just that we have now touched upon such an issue, the issue of this very pridefulness when representatives of one religious belief talk about their sort of...
They exalt themselves above others with their exclusivity. But it is consciousness speaking in them, and consciousness hooks them on that. The devil is actually cunning and strong. We already talked about it more than once. And one of his favorite manipulations, which he perpetrates in the human head, or as they say, in consciousness, is precisely this very pridefulness and belonging to the chosen ones. Meaning the process itself. After all, when Andrei spoke on his own behalf and about something else, he spoke sincerely, he was filled, and he really lived by those feelings, by those memories, about his experience. And it was obvious that he was like a flower reaching for the sun, right? But as soon as he appeared in front of people and put a mask of a leader on himself, he started carrying the burden of responsibility for the organization, and that was it.
So even these moments of returning to the state of perception through feelings and recalling it beget this very inner ignition of this alive...
This was sincerity, of course.
Whereas just a dry word...
You could hear this echo of the Holy Spirit that abode in him. Well, in this case, it's just the work of consciousness. Just tritely...
lack of tools and knowledge, and simply when...
Of course, an alive is turned into a dead. The devil is strong.
But why does this happen? Because there is no experience.
Well, it happens because, in fact, as we said, the system wants to eat. It is insatiable. Moreover, it directs all its efforts towards keeping a person from spiritual salvation. It's not advantageous to Satan. And since it's not advantageous to him, this means he spends more energy on those who are stronger. But it's natural that when a person awakens spiritually, he should be even more careful and understand elementary things, that he will definitely be attacked. By all means, pridefulness will sweep over. That which is supposed to happen will definitely happen, meaning the attack of precisely those demons in one's head.
You know, this case is a vivid example for many people even to see and understand where a person is real and where those very mechanisms of something alien,
This is really seen.
extraneous and false switch on. It may be seen and felt by every person.
Let's just look at Andrei, okay? If we take the two pictures and compare, on one of them he's alive, as he was saying, when the spirit descends on a person. The person gets inflamed, God is with him, it can be seen that he's a light, and it can be seen when pridefulness ignites in a person, so to say. Then spirituality fades, and these two pictures show the exact opposite of one and the same person, merely that. While in actual fact, those divisions which the devil arranges, and he actually arranges them everywhere, in a family, in a group, in any religion, if we look, they have confrontation among themselves everywhere. Someone always competes with someone else, and so on. Everything is divided. And in the same way, religion divides within itself. Well, this is normal, this is Satan's tool. It's just that when if people knew this, they would be able to resist it easily. Consciousness says one thing, while a human as personality commands it to do something else, and everything falls into place.
It is so interesting that it turns out that even representatives of different religions sometimes do not know about each other.
Of course they don't know.
Because for me, it has become news how, let's say, representatives of Islam speak of Christianity, of Jesus Christ.
Well, I will say in most cases they speak very positively because they know him. In the Quran, it is written about this, and they know all this very well.
Yes, but let's say, what do believers in Orthodox Christianity know about that very Islam?
Well, in this case, if we look, like in Andrei's case, when pridefulness comes into action, as well as affiliation with the chosen ones, it blocks the way to the truth. And that's all, people may just not know. While they know only what they see on TV, yet what is shown on TV, do they really show us true Muslims who indeed live by God, who are indeed filled with this God's love. And how many of such Muslims are there? A great many.
The system sets people against each other
Of course.
and simply tries to disunite them,
By all means.
so that they don't even look in the direction of a different religious teaching and people of a different faith.
And not only in religion, but in religion all the more so, because religion exactly implies tools for salvation in general. So naturally, it is the area of Satan's enhanced interest. He will do everything to make people divided and separated.
I'd like to show a video about what representatives of Islam say about Jesus.
Let's watch.
A survey among Muslims whether they know who Jesus is.
He's a prophet of Christians and our prophet of Muslims. He's not a prophet. Yes, he's a prophet. He was born in the land of Israel. He is honored by Muslims just as he is considered to be a prophet of Christians. He is honored by Muslims as well. He is our prophet too.
He was a prophet, a messenger like our Muhammad, a revered prophet. He spent many years in exile, endured a lot, and there was so much humiliation. And the last thing was that they forced him to carry the cross to Calvary and hanged him on that cross. It was for his call to the Almighty, to the One, to God's unity.
Jesus was a prophet. He called people to monotheism. This is what I know about him. And also that people distorted many of his messages. That's what I know. Jesus is God's messenger. In Islam, he is Isa. With the help of Allah, the Almighty, he raised people from the dead. The fact that he had lived to the age of 33 years. This is what we know in Islam.
And how does he differ in the teaching of Islam and the teaching of Christianity? What is the difference?
There is no difference. In fact, all the prophets who came, who had been before the Prophet Muhammad, they taught monotheism.
Well, here's the answer. But what if we conduct such a survey among Christians and ask them if they know who Muhammad is?
And what one God is meant.
And what one God is meant, and here they say, he's a prophet just like our prophet. Yet will Christians say that Muhammad is a prophet just like our Jesus? No. Why? Because our Jesus is the Son of God. But what did Jesus say in this regard? That all of us are God's children. Isn't this what he said? And didn't he teach us this very point? At that, is the Prophet Muhammad not a son of God? Isn't this true? And what example did both Jesus and Muhammad show? How much time did Muhammad spend in prayer practices, in spiritual practices, during the day? And how much time did Jesus spend on prayers? Isn't this an example? What opinion did they voice about other religions? And what did they say? And what do their followers say? A simple question. I've always been amazed at how, so to say, followers relying on teachings of the prophets, the messengers of God whom they believe in, how the followers distort the words of their own prophets. Well, and often, quite often, unfortunately, ministers of one or another religion distort the words of their own prophets, that which their religion is built upon, and begin to interpret from their mind. It's clear that consciousness interferes, everything is clear, but it's unclear why people believe and listen to them. For this is an obvious discrepancy from what a God's messenger taught. Isn't that so? People know their holy scriptures, but still listen to their earthly authority figure, don't they? Who says directly opposite things, distorting those very words, and they don't admonish him and continue following him. That's the paradox. Who is superior? It's clear that God is superior to everyone, but was God's messenger, the one on whom a religion is built, was he less right? Yet, in God knows how many years, some person who doesn't know God, but talks in his own way, is he superior and should be trusted? So the paradox is that consciousness believes, it forces people to believe. These are convenient forms of manipulating believers, specifically those people who strive for God. It's a convenient way of manipulation by consciousness. Thus the system takes its conductors, so to say, there is no other way to call them, conductors of Satan's will. It elevates them, exalts them, and makes people follow a false prophet. And then people with such, let's say, false teachers or authorities, or false prophets, whatever they are called, they run around in circles. But they never get anywhere. It's better, as they say, to slowly limp in a straight line than to run around in circles with such authority figures. Generally speaking, this is wrong. I would compare it to, I'll go back to the desert again. This is easily understandable. People who are thirsty, who are walking in the desert under the burning sun, being exhausted, they come to the source with pure water, and there's enough of it to satisfy thirst, to stock up and to keep moving. But at this point, an authority figure tells them, no, don't drink from this source. Let's go. There, you see, there is an ocean on the horizon. We will endure a little bit, but we will arrive. And from the true, enormous source, we will not only drink our fill, but we'll swim in it. And people following this messenger from Satan arrive at the ocean. But as we know, ocean water is not suitable for drinking, so there they remain. This is sad, actually.
The subject of authority figures also, it turns out that who creates them?
People create them. People. No one creates them. People themselves create authority figures. With their support, they actually show their willingness to be subordinate. How can it be otherwise? After all, it is obvious. It is seen who is filled with spirit, and when a person is filled. And it is seen who is empty. This is felt. How can it be otherwise? For instance, if it was up to me, I would have stopped Andrei when he started talking about this if I were there. But I would have listened to him with pleasure when he talked about something else. That's a different matter. Isn't it so? Isn't this how believers should act? Shouldn't they defend, regardless of who is in front of them, defend the truth before anyone? Right? And this paradox continues, and it can be observed everywhere. Again, the same issues of authority figures and management issues force those very believers and those very monks to hide the Bugalatra.
Fear.
Fear. Fear of whom?
When life is at stake.
That's the paradox, of course. They study it, try to comprehend it, they do comprehend it, but they are forced to do this secretly. So when asking those priests and monks questions, I already said that they came from many religions, but not everyone. There are already many who openly say that they not just read it, but also tell others about it, because they have already grasped the essence, which is set forth in it. And they understand that it doesn't hinder their religion in any way, but on the contrary facilitates and simplifies this path. It precisely facilitates conveying the truth to parishioners as well as their own comprehension. So many already use it openly and are neither ashamed or afraid of that, and nothing terrible happens. Of course, there were also those who came to someone else's abode and tried to bring in their rules coming from the mind, with the Bugalatra in their hands, but from the mind. Certainly, such individuals must be driven out, no matter what they hold in their hands. This is also right.
You also said such a thing that for every faithful person, let's say, it would be right to act in such a way that at those moments when something other than truth is being voiced, it should be stopped. However, people don't have an understanding of this truth. Or why does this happen?
There is an understanding, people feel. People really feel
What holds them back?
fear.
Fear.
Fear of an authority figure, just that. If he's an authority, that means he's right. There cannot be such a thing. Truth and verity is one for everyone. And again, a person who strives for God when there is a group, in fact, a collective work is going on. A meeting, what's the difference? If he has appointed himself an authority, or if people have appointed him, then his responsibility is 10 times greater than that of a regular person. After all, he takes on the responsibility for other people as well, and there is no room for pridefulness here. Isn't that right?
The question is just what is more valuable for a person?
The truth.
Increase of his flock, or so that everyone...
That's what I'm saying, truth or profit. And here, much puts everything in its place. Unfortunately. But it's all surmountable. It is all temporary, and it will definitely pass.
I think many people will later on just sort of smile when having already felt this very life, so to say, thanks to the knowledge.
One shouldn't smile but should help. A simple understanding that this very authority figure, whether he's a priest or whoever else, if he takes the floor and broadcasts this word in front of people, and all the more if he teaches them, but at the same time he turns into an empty bucket and begins to trumpet from the mind from Satan, then their task, first and foremost, in this case as of Christians, is to stop this disgusting thing that is coming and broadcasting through the person. After all, Andrei's problem is only in the fact that he listened to his consciousness. Merely that he gave the floor to Satan. Well, this is inappropriate.
What does a person multiply?
Isn't it so?
Yes, what does he multiply bearing such a responsibility?
Of course.
For the destinies of millions of people?
Sure. If he even had an understanding, he wouldn't have allowed this. But he simply defends his corporate interests, as it is said. However, can an interest really be above spiritual salvation of any person? It seems to be a trifle, but it's not a trifle.
Yet everything can change at any minute, as they say. God works in mysterious ways, and
Certainly.
how fast, how people...
Once we already said that neither rivalry nor comparisons should be allowed. After all, Andrei also said regarding comparisons that it's intolerable, and one shouldn't judge.
Loss of grace.
Certainly this leads to a loss of grace. Religions should be spiritually united. At the very least, we should understand that if we pray to one God, then no matter what they call him, others pray to the same God, so they are at least our brothers.
Once he also said that unification of religions exactly in the system is impossible because it leads either to merger
Of course.
or to acquisition.
Sure.
But it is possible for every person within the limits of his religion to come to...
There should simply be an understanding. If I pray to God and you pray to God, I call him by one name, you call him by another name, but God is one. Then what disputes can we have with each other? I have my traditions, you have your traditions, we should just respect them. And I will say, if there was a family where... Well, there are actually such families. Just as an example, okay? There are such families in which there are representatives of different religions. This is wonderful, in fact. This is really wonderful. God is one. But traditions are different, and there are more holidays. Is that bad? In my opinion, it's wonderful.
A holiday of spirit is one more, I would say, it's another reminder of that fact that...
Well, there should always be a holiday of spirit, and it shouldn't be lost. Whereas ordinary mundane or religious holidays, joined ones in different cultures, well, this is interesting indeed. It enriches life.
It's actually true. During prayer, people can say different words and there are different languages, right? Different trends, but inside they feel one and the same thing. Internally, they strive for the same. How can a person do it so that not words would come first, but feelings?
But words do not work. As a matter of fact, you can utter abracadabra and mutter whatever you like, Yet the main thing is those feelings which arise in you. The feelings coming from personality, while words are needed to deceive and to defeat consciousness, so that just like a drop of water wears away a stone, in the same way the words of prayer come from personality, pass through consciousness, and reach the soul. You see, they remove this very obstacle. This is perception through feelings, while words in this case are like an understandable tool for tuning a person himself so that he would tune in correctly and turn the power of his attention in the right direction. Merely for that. If you speak with a prayer, then as we already said, prayer is by no means a dialogue or a monologue. Genuine prayer goes without words. Genuine prayer is expressed through feelings. Does love actually have words? It is the deepest inner feeling, right? It is what makes you happy. Well, here again, while giving this feeling the shape of words, we diminish it substantially. And we not just diminish it, but make it less valuable and important. Why? Because there are too many interpretations of that very happiness and that very love, which consciousness has fragmented and uses where it likes, right? But true love is the only one that can evoke deep inner feelings, and it's the only one that fills you with the Holy Spirit.
And this love is what every person who truly feels comes in contact with.
The one who sincerely strives for God despite anything and anyone. The one who truly strives for the spiritual world. This is simple.
I'd like to say for myself to express sincere gratitude, of course, to those thanks to whom this knowledge has come into this world, because
it has come only thanks to God. Everything is done by His will.
To those who truly serve Him.
No one would have brought it and no one would have done anything. There is no one except Him. In this case, let's say, as in many other cases, when this knowledge has been brought, where is anyone's merit?
Yes, and it is the choice of every person to accept it or not, but still, well, one should remember that suddenly on the way to the truth, consciousness always gets denser. So one should simply trust feelings and believe one's inner self.
One shouldn't believe,
but should know.
Belief is good, of course. It is better than emptiness, but knowledge is much better. It's better to gain experience.
To verify.
Today, as it turns out, we have a day dedicated to Archpriest Andrei. After all, he gained experience. And this experience guided him through his entire life. Yes. Just like all people, he has his own issues regarding, let's say, his relationship with consciousness and matters of service. But nevertheless, he gained the experience. Isn't this valuable? It is actually knowledge. It is knowledge that the spiritual does exist. And now he has belief and hope that he will attain it. Let's say, not as a one-time occurrence, but he will attain it forever. This is belief, while that is experience, that is knowledge. Yet, if he had the right tools and the right approach, he would gain a knowledge of the fact that he has attained it, not will attain it someday, right?
That personality will retain it.
Is this complicated? It's not complicated at all. If this is accessible to children, then for adults all the more. In general, I certainly wish people to mature. Spiritually mature. Well, this is everyone's choice. Here, of course, we can see the biggest justice. And it can really come only from God. The right of choice, which is given to every human being, is a human who chooses whom to serve, God or Satan. A human chooses to live or to die. Everything is in his hands. And again, it's in the hands of people whether to unite or to separate. To be good or to be evil, everything depends on a person. If a person wants to, he comes to the side of God, resists Satan, and serves God. If he wants to, he serves Satan and resists God. This is his choice. Well, he won't be able to resist God, but it is possible to resist the spiritual. And this is done by some people quite successfully. In conclusion, I'd like to just say that, in reality, a human himself is a creator of his future. This life is given to a human for him to make a choice, for him to build life eternal for himself, or to dig a grave for himself. This is the truth, and you cannot get away from it.
God grants love will triumph.
Love is what every person should possess. There should be plenty of it in everyone. That's the point, then it's an ideal society. And it is possible. So let us love each other. This is simple.